Chapter 179. In the hall, Carrie sat there with a livid face. His whole body was exuding anger and resentment, and he was in a depressed state. In front of Carrie, there were 4 guys squatting. From left to right, they were Hui Mao, Alu, Chifeng, Shueqiu, and Miantuan. Hui Mao licked his paws and wiped his beard, wiping the food residue from the corner of his mouth. He didn't care about Carrie's depression at all. Chifeng wagged his tail uneasily and drooped his head, glancing at Carrie from time to time, as if admitting his mistake. Shueqiu had a charmingly naive look and looked simple and honest, but those who knew this fatty knew that this was just the surface. In fact, this fatty was full of evil tricks and had learned from the Miantuan to become worse and worse. As for the Miantuan, he had been through a lot of training and had seen many similar situations. When he needed to put on an act, he would show weakness when he needed to, and he looked even more innocent than Carrie. When Carrie saw them, the veins on his forehead bulged. Didn't they just run out to compete with Yudo's? When he came back, he found that his storage cabinet had been emptied, eaten, drunk, and taken. Carrie glanced at Shueqiu and was furious. This fatty had recently learned to store food like a hamster. Carrie felt that the reason why this fatty's mouth was so big was because it was stuffed with food. Rubbing his forehead, Carrie said in a low voice, "I say, why are you guys always staring at my storage cabinet? Xiaoshang, Ba Dao, and Beaver also have a lot of food in their cabinets. Do you think I'm easy to bully?" The Miantuan blinked. It couldn't speak, but the instigator was this little devil, and he still looked innocent. "Who opened the lock?" Carrie asked. After returning to Sector K, Carrie had already changed his locks 3 times. Not long ago, he had purposely obtained a lock that was said to be highly secure from the A Squadron. Otherwise, Carrie would not have let his guard down recently, and the first thing he saw when he returned was an empty storage cabinet. He was wrong. He was really wrong. He shouldn't have let his guard down, especially when this Hui Mao came back. These guys had gathered together to find a few evildoers from different organizations. Hearing Carrie's question, the 3 on the right turned to look at Hui Mao, who was crouching on the far left with a calm expression. Carrie's eyes twitched. He knew it was this cat. Carrie had a love-hate relationship with Hui Mao. After all, this cat had saved his life before. However, this fellow was really infuriating. Carrie thought for a moment and asked, "I say, Wheeze, did Scylla mistreat you and didn't feed you?" "No," Hui Mao answered honestly. "Then why did you light up my storage cabinet with them?" "Because the Miantuan and Shueqiu told me that you have Sector K specialties. I haven't eaten much of Sector K specialties, at least not the stuff in your cabinet." Hui Mao had no self-awareness of his wrongdoings. Carrie raised an eyebrow and stepped on the Miantuan's tail that was about to escape. Then he grabbed Shueqiu's big face and said, "You 2 thud." Thud. 2 snaps on the head. Shueqiu covered his head with his chubby hands and looked wronged. Meanwhile, the Miantuan gradually tore down from the wall, his flat body pitifully recovering. "Don't give me that." After taking care of Shueqiu and the Miantuan, Carrie faced Chifeng and advised earnestly, "I say, Chifeng, don't learn from these 2 bad guys. I'll teach you one thing. You'll be stained by the company you keep. Breaking into someone's cabinet and stealing food is wrong. You shouldn't do it." Chifeng swung his tail and tilted his head, seemingly digesting Carrie's words. Hui Mao licked his paws and looked at Carrie. He asked, "Why are the prices on this planet so expensive, Carrie? Isn't this the Vanguard's base? How can they treat their own members like this?" On this planet, the price of a lot of food was doubled or even several times higher. After seeing the prices, Hui Mao became stingy. The allowance Scylla gave him was limited, so it really wasn't worth it to buy these things. Because of this, the Miantuan beckoned with his tail and went to rob Carrie. In reality, every squadron's food and other items are specially prepared by themselves. Only medical and some other equipment are used for public use. The stockpiling of items and amassing wealth are all considered by the B Squadron. It is generally believed that capable B Squadrons are self-sufficient and have more money on hand. Those who can't can only pay a higher price in exchange. Is that so? How stingy? Hui Mao's ears twitched. This isn't stingy. If you want to buy food in bulk, the best way is to fly your own space plane and buy it. Not even 10 squadrons can afford to feed people with your appetites. Although the four fellows in front of him looked quite small, every one of them was a big eater. The Mietwan's appetite was 3 times his body weight, and Hui Mao, Qifeng, and Shueqiu were all fellows with fast metabolism. Right now, Shueqiu was almost 60 centimeters tall when he stood up. He had been growing really fast recently. Carrie had already flown his space plane to go shopping once, and he didn't expect to see Hui Mao and Qifeng this time. For a growing Qifeng, his appetite was about the same as Shueqiu's. Carrie was thinking that he would have to go shopping again soon. Suddenly, Carrie's expression turned strange. He wanted to slap himself. F***CK. I don't care about Silin and Tang Xiuqiu, but why do I have to care so much? Isn't this the same as a stay-at-home dad? Qifeng looked at Shueqiu and the Miantuan. They were right. Carrie's stay-at-home dad was very easy to fool. However, the stay-at-home dad seemed to have some mental issues. He actually slapped himself. Looking at the four fellows who were communicating with each other with their eyes, Carrie waved his hands helplessly. Get out of here. My stomach hurts just looking at you. Qifeng and Shueqiu, the two of you are going to have a cultural assessment. If you can't pass it, your salaries will be deducted. As for your salaries that are in the negative, I won't have a locker to give you 3 lights. Qifeng and Shueqiu were studying cultural knowledge. Although 10 days wasn't a long time, they were improving very quickly. Every few days, they would be given an assessment. However, this assessment wouldn't go easy on them just because they were beginners. It was an assessment for intermediate-level education. This was also the reason why the two fellows' salaries were in the negative despite their high IQ. It should be known that during the 5-year recuperation period, they were paid. Every official member would have a stable salary. In the entire 6th Division, the only 2 fellows whose salaries were in the negative were Shueqiu and Qifeng. The difficulty of Shueqiu and Qifeng's assessment was set by Silin. Based on Shueqiu and Qifeng's level of brain development, they would be able to catch up very quickly. After the trip to Sector S, Silin felt a sense of urgency. He had to get these 2 new members to catch up and integrate into the group as soon as possible. Otherwise, something might go wrong in the later stages of the mission. Shueqiu and Qifeng went to the study room to study. Hui Mao and the Miantuan followed them. One was to give pointers and the other to watch the show. After the 4 fellows left, he got up and went outside to breathe in some fresh air and exhale the stuffiness in his chest. Facing these little bastards every day, he felt like he had gone through the vicissitudes of life. But he didn't expect to see Xiaoshang, Beaver, and the others returning from outside just as he walked out of the door. Yo, Nanny Daddy Carrie, are you done with your training? Xiaoshang giggled. Carrie felt the string of reason in his head tighten with a dull bang. You're the nanny daddy. You're all nanny daddy. You're all nanny daddy in your past life, this life, and the next life. Sigh. Isn't it good that they're close to you? Be it Shueqiu or Qifeng, they're already this strong even before they've grown up. When they've grown up, you'll have a strong backing. Amen. Speaking of which, the little Qifeng is becoming more and more like a human. Yesterday, I saw him pick a vintage lock with ease. Beaver said. The corner of Carrie's eyes twitched again. Lock-picking, a bad feeling in the research building of the 6th Division stronghold. Silin and Lycrabe were in the middle of their research. Silin had brought back a lot of good stuff this time. The bacteria collected from the foreign planet had already been expanded. There were also the bacteria from the Class 1 prison planet. Although they died very quickly in the prison environment, Silin had frozen them with a special method and brought them to the B Squadron's laboratory. Lycrabe was very interested in the samples Silin had brought back. He had been full of energy lately and didn't sleep for a few nights in a row. He stayed in the laboratory all day long. Today, Silin and Lycrabe worked together to extract a certain antibacterial drug from a few reconstructed bacteria. This was a part of one of Lycrabe's research projects. 72 hours later, Silin looked at the 100 microliters of liquid in the small tube in his hand and sighed. It's finally out. With this, I can improve the antidote and minimize casualties when we get out. Lycrabe was in high spirits right now. He was very tired, but he felt very fulfilled. Patting Lycrabe, Scylla said, "Rest first. You haven't rested for many days." Lycrabe nodded and put the small tubes in his hand into a special freezer. These anti-growth medicines that he had painstakingly purified could not be wasted because of improper storage. After leaving the laboratory, Scylla and Lycrabe went to the cafeteria and had a big meal. Lycrabe went back to rest, and Scylla was about to go back and rest as well. However, the communicator in his hand suddenly rang. Looking at the person displayed on it, Scylla went to a secluded place and connected the call. Shotton's image was displayed on the communicator. In the image, Shotton also looked tired. The B Squadron commanders were all at the A Squadron recently. The A Squadron and their commanders were busy with Sector S's matters. The appearance of Mist, Wusha, and Azrael especially had everyone's nerves tensed up again. Moreover, there was still the matter of Alillo's star map fragment. "What's wrong, Commander?" Scylla asked. Shotton pulled the corner of his mouth. He didn't look in a good mood. It was probably because things weren't going well at Sector S that everyone's mood was affected. "How have you been lately, Scylla?" As a commander, Shotton didn't have much energy to pay attention to his own unit situation. Every time he did, he would talk to the lieutenant commanders and learn about the situation of their respective units. "Not bad. I proposed a resistant substance to Lycrabe today, and Lycrabe will be developing and improving it. Chio went to the shooting range with Ba Dao, and Carrie is with Chiefing and Shuechio." Scylla briefly explained the situation of the unit to Shotton. "Oh, Lycrabe is progressing pretty fast." Shotton's spirits rose, and joy appeared in his eyes. For the 6th Division, innovation was one of the most important things they lacked. Ever since they found the special energy mine at Sector Z, Shotton had gained some confidence among the squad commanders. However, it wasn't enough. Now, the only person who could shake Shotton's spirits was Scylla's. Whether it was Lycrabe or Yudo's, Shotton was very satisfied with both of them. Now, there was Chiefing as well. That non-pure human little guy's attack power was extraordinary. The duo talked about the general situation of the unit, and Scylla learned some things about Sector S from Shotton. It's not just Sector S right now. Undercurrents are surging in the other sectors as well. 2 days ago, a top 10 assassin organization was taken out, and none of them survived. At least that's what the news said. The regiment sent someone to confirm the news. However, no matter what the truth is, it was a reminder to everyone that we've gotten used to living in peace for decades, and those old-timers didn't even have the power to fight back when they appeared one after another. Vanguard may not be like that, but we still need to be vigilant. "Is it chaotic outside right now?" Scylla asked. "Not really. It's just that a few small hunter regiments and assassin organizations have suffered because of certain forces. The big four is still fine." Scylla suddenly thought of something and said, "Diaz's side is almost healed, but judging from the current situation, should we send someone to pick them up? The main treatment has been completed, and the next step is to spend time recovering. Since the situation is a little complicated right now, it's better to pick them up." Diaz and the others had just been treated, and they weren't 100% recovered yet. No one knew if someone hostile to Vanguard would attack them on the other side. Shotton thought for a moment. "That's fine. Discuss it with the other lieutenant commanders and tell me the results." "All right." After ending the communication, Scylla did not return to the house immediately. Instead, he stood at the corridor and looked at the scenery in the distance. Their trip to Sector S had failed to ignite the fire, and they had returned after wandering around for a bit. Of course, they felt discontent. Scylla Helong and his group strength was just too weak. Compared to the two veteran assassin organizations, Fog and Wusha, and that special Azrael, that even the authorities had a headache over, Scylla Helong's previous thinking was just too simple. It was only after they actually went there that they realized that there were just too few places where they could interfere. They nearly lost their lives at the Level 1 prison planet, and they were told to leave before they could do much at the Level 3 prison planet. Veteran forces were in a state of rapid development, be it comprehensive combat power or new technology research and development. Many times, they would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat right now. They were resting and recuperating at Vanguard Stronghold. According to the squad's plan, Some non-essential long-distance missions were temporarily suspended until the situation stabilized. However, if they wanted to grow as quickly as possible, they had to put into practice. Scylla went to the other lieutenant commanders and explained the situation on Dias's side. Although the lieutenant commanders expressed their approval, they were hesitant when it came to who to send. Moreover, this was the 6th B Squadron's own business. According to the rules, the A Squadron would not interfere. In a situation like this, if the A Squadron did not interfere, it would be the equivalent of losing a great protective umbrella. The danger level would also be much higher. Everyone had elite soldiers under them, but they knew what the situation outside was like, and no one wanted to test it out. They were reluctant to let these elite soldiers go after much difficulty. Scylla had expected the lieutenant commander's reactions a long time ago. He tapped his fingers on the table. Actually, I already have an idea of who to send. It's fine as long as this decision passes. Scylla, who are you going to send? Zakasha asked. Zakasha was a bit conservative when it came to this matter. Although she wanted Asha and the others to return safely as soon as possible, Zakasha was still a little hesitant about sending people out. After all, she had only taken over as a lieutenant commander for a short time, and there were some things that she was not bold enough to make. I'll lead the team myself. We don't need too many people, just a few people from our squad. Right now, there aren't many healers left at Sector E, only about 50 or so. A medium-sized spaceplane will do. However, the weapons and fighter configuration of this spaceplane must be of a higher level. A spaceplane's high-level configuration is a must, Akai said, but Scylla isn't a little too, it's fine. If we can't even handle this, then no matter how many people we send, it'll be a waste. After a pause, Scylla smiled and said, actually, it's mainly because they've been bored out of their minds lately, and they don't have the motivation to do anything. They might not run into any trouble after they go out, and a squadron's information comes from all sectors. It's only when we gather them together that we realized how serious the situation is. But we're only going to Sector E to pick them up, so it should be fine. According to the information he received so far, Scylla felt that Fog and Wuxia were mainly targeting certain assassin organizations, while Azrael continued to stay silent. As long as the 3 of them did not come out, it was not too serious for Vanguard. Other than that, Scylla felt that even if they ran into some trouble, it would also be a chance for the squad members to train themselves. In this era where the strong roamed, if they could not keep up, they would only be left further and further behind. This was not what Carrie and the others hoped for. In fact, Scylla could see that Carrie and the others were not in a good state of mind as of late. Tang Xiuqiu would fall asleep at the shooting range, and Yudos would often place his fingers on offensive maneuvers when he was piloting the fighter. It was a reflection of his true thoughts. Fledglings must fly eventually. After the vice commander meeting, Scylla gathered all the combat personnel of the squad and confirmed the roster mainly on a voluntary basis. Scylla led the squad consisting of Carrie, Beaver, Yudi, Xiaoshang, Ba Dao, Tang Xiuqiu, Yudos, Lycrabe, and Chiefing. If there was Yudi, there would definitely be Mianwan. If there was Tang Xiuqiu, there would definitely be Xueqiu, and if there was Scylla, there would definitely be Huimao. Carrie thought to himself that at least the food stored in the stronghold storage cabinet would not be consumed by the 3 light. After confirming it, Scylla informed Shotten and left with his men in the aircraft. In a building in the A Squad's stronghold area. It really is that kid. Now in his 6th division, he's the only one with a bit of drive. Chapter 180. This time, Scylla and the others were very low-key when they went to Sector E to pick up Dias and the others. There were no symbolic symbols on the spaceplane, and Udo, on the other hand, had polished his emblem until it was shiny every day. Just like Tang Xiuqiu, he wore it on a chain inside his body instead of pinning it to the outside. It wasn't that he was afraid, it was just that he wanted to minimize conflicts if he could. We're going to keep a low profile this time. This was what Scylla had said before they departed. Although he had always kept a low profile, Yudos was overflowing with excitement, as this was his first time participating in a mission. Lycrabe's original plan was to continue his research and development of antibiotics at the 6th Division stronghold, but since Sillin and the others were leaving, Lycrabe put his research on hold for now. This time, he was on a Sector E to take a look as well. It had been so many years, and he wondered how the sector famous for its medicine had developed. Chiefing was wearing a very cute set of children's clothing. It was something Carrie bought when he went to buy new clothes for Tang Xiuqiu. Chiefing's height was about the same as Tang Xiuqiu's, and Carrie thought it looked good, so he bought it together. Still, it was quite suitable for Chiefing to wear. He had to admit that Carrie did have the tendency to be a stay-at-home dad. Right now, Chiefing and Tang Xiuqiu were chatting with each other in children's clothing. Tang Xiuqiu was telling Chiefing about Diaz, and Xiuqiu was lying on Tang Xiuqiu's back without falling off at all. It would seem that he had gotten used to it since a long time ago. The message had been sent to Diaz, and Diaz had probably gathered everyone by the time they arrived. According to the operation plan, it was quite simple, but there was no telling what kind of trouble they might encounter. According to the coordinates Diaz had given them, Sillin and his entourage arrived at a sub-district planet of Sector E. This place wasn't the most central part of Sector E. Diaz's treatment was located at the central region, but he had been transferred to this planet after the core treatment. That way, they could avoid some of the troubles of the central region. After all, Diaz used to be the vice commander of Vanguard's 6th B Squadron. Together with Asia, the two vice commanders would be in a much more difficult situation if someone harbored ill intentions towards Vanguard. It would be better for them to come to a slightly more peaceful place to recuperate and heal in peace. Sillin parked the space plane at the airport's parking spot and paid the caretaker fee. Then, he led the group to the place Diaz had mentioned. As soon as they got off the aircraft, Lycrabe frowned. "It smells like medicine." Yudo shrugged. "I don't smell any medicine. I just feel a little cold." The sun was shining brightly today, but the weather felt a little solemn, oppressive, and gloomy. Sector E has always been like this. It's like a huge hospital, and you've entered the hospital's door. Sillin said. Carrie and the others shuddered unconsciously. They hated the word hospital the most. It gave them goosebumps. This planet was quieter than the few planets they had passed through before. There weren't many hospitals on this planet, and most of them were branches attached to famous large hospitals. Most of them focused on advanced care. The main colors of the planet were white and green. White represented cleanliness, and green represented vitality. After exiting the port, the group appeared much quieter than before. Maybe it was because of the atmosphere here. In reality, this planet was much better than the other planets that focused on core treatment and first aid. There were joys and sorrows everywhere, and death was everywhere. The people who cried out in sorrow but were helpless would affect the mood of the people around them. Corresponding to medical treatment, the food here focused more on nutrition and conditioning. Although the taste might not be great, the emphasis was on health. Some additives were also banned here. They got off at a station on the Loop Line train, and then they had to walk the rest of the way. Other than special hospital vehicles, no other flying cars were allowed to enter the advanced care area. At first, Chiefing was a little nervous. After all, he felt that he was a little different from the others. But he gradually relaxed later on. Those who saw Chiefing were just a little curious, but they didn't pay much attention to him. After all, there were a lot of races in these well-developed places. No one would pay much attention to someone with 3 pairs of hands like Ba Dao. There were plenty of people with long tails. Although normal humans were still the majority on these planets, no one would pay too much attention as long as they weren't too strange. Since he wouldn't be treated as a monster, Qifeng also started to become active. He looked curiously at the surrounding buildings and the white robots and flying cars in the air. "Oh, it's here." Sillin pointed to a door and said. The door plate on the door was clearly marked. It was the affiliated rehabilitation center that Diaz had given them. Diaz and a few other people were all here for the later stages of rehabilitation. After the identity scan, Sillin and his party entered the rehabilitation center area. "But isn't this rehabilitation center too big?" Xiaoshang stared. Looking around, there was a wide lawn, endless, scattered buildings, wrought-tan trellises, woods, wooden benches, gardens, and so on. When the patients were bored, they would come out to relax, and exercise their hands and feet. It seems that these patients are in a good mood, Xiaoshang said. Ba Dao glanced at him. Then you can come often in the future. Then forget it. According to the detailed address given by Dias, after Silin and the others learned the distribution of the buildings from navigation robot, the navigation robot took them to Area 16, where Dias was located. There were many areas in the rehabilitation center, and each area had a set of corresponding facilities, wards, staff, and so on. The division of the areas was actually just separated by some small fences, and it was not very enclosed. Sometimes people from different areas would gather together to talk. The rehabilitation center was originally relatively monotonous, and it would be boring if there was no one to talk to. After the navigation robot took them to Area 16, it left. Silin looked for the room number given by Dias, but he didn't see anyone. He asked the person in charge here, and they said that he probably went out to do something or went out to relax and didn't come back. In the rehabilitation center, as long as the patient's condition was out of danger, the restrictions on the patients were not strict, and the patients would have a high degree of freedom. Of course, they must come back at night. Let's go sit outside and eat something while we wait. Silin looked at the time and said. They all agreed, but they didn't seem to have much appetite. After all, in this kind of place, although it was only a rehabilitation center, it still affected them, and they always felt depressed. Area 16 had a dedicated F&B department, but it wasn't time to eat now, so there weren't many people there. Silin and his group found a big table near the woods and ordered a few dishes to eat first. They chatted for a while, and a person came to a small round table not far away. To be exact, it was a tall beauty, and her long hair was casually tied into a bun at the back. Her facial features were a little deep, and the corners of her eyes were slightly raised. She always looked like she was smiling, and she didn't have the kind of weakness that ordinary women had. She had a heroic spirit, and she was quite imposing. She wore a white medical coat, and she didn't look like a nurse, but more like a doctor. Wow, an angel in white, Xiaoshang said sneakily. Not a bad figure, Carrie and the others agreed. The angel in white also looked up at Silin and his group. Without any extra expression, he retracted his gaze, sat down, and reached into his coat pocket to take out a palm-sized white rabbit. The rabbit's ears were drooping, and it should be that breed. After the rabbit was placed on the table, it was still a little groggy, and it should have just woken up. After the angel in white put the rabbit down, he ordered some dishes from the service robot that flew over. Not long after, the service robot sent the dishes to the table. In fact, there were only 3 plates that were sent to the table. A plate of fresh carrots, white radishes, red radishes, and other radishes, a plate of simple mixed grain buns, and a large plate of beautifying pig's trotters that shouldn't be called a basin. They didn't know what breed of pig it was, but one of its trotters was like a watermelon. There were at least 8 trotters on the plate, and they were covered with sauce. It should have been very beautiful, but Silin and the others felt like their stomachs were cramping. After seeing the plate of radishes, the rabbit was full of energy and happily jumped to the side of the plate and started eating. Her small teeth and her trademark 3-petaled mouth were grinding, and she ate with great enthusiasm. As for the angel in white, he picked up a mixed grain buns and ate them in one bite. Then he took out his knife and fork and started eating the large, beautifying pig's trotters. It had to be said that the angel in white's fingers were very beautiful, and using the knife had become a kind of art. She used the knife nimbly and neatly cut off the meat from the large pig's trotters. Then, she used a fork to pick up the meat and sent it to her mouth. Many people didn't use a knife when eating pig's trotters because they found it troublesome. But now, looking at the angel in white using a knife, it felt very comfortable, and it made people feel that this was how it should be eaten. Of course, if it was someone else, it would be different. The reason why this scene was so beautiful was because of the person using the knife. Basically, the few of them just watched the angel in white and her rabbit eat, and they didn't eat much of the food on the table. Half an hour later, a large plate of beautifying pig's trotters was finished. The angel in white elegantly picked up a napkin and wiped her mouth. Then, she took the drink that the service robot brought over and closed it. Opposite her, the rabbit still had a quarter of the carrots that hadn't been finished, and it would probably be finished by the time she finished the drink in the cup. "Hi, beautiful." Xiao Shang was quite direct, and when he saw the angel looking over, he greeted. But this greeting was full of frivolity. "Hi, handsome guys." The angel in white replied with a smile. Even though it was something similar, but the aura was too strong, and Xiao Shang's smile was a little stiff. "Nice knife skills." Silin raised his cup and gestured, and then he drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. The angel in white just smiled and casually took a sip. Silin didn't care, and he looked at Lycrabe. He knew what Lycrabe was thinking. It seemed that the so-called recovery area wasn't that peaceful. "You just finished the surgery?" Lycrabe asked. He didn't smile, but frowned slightly. "Why did you have to do such an emergency surgery in the recovery area?" Hearing Lycrabe's words, the angel in white looked over with some surprise. From the expressions of Silin and the others, it could be seen that Silin and Lycrabe had already guessed that she had just had an external surgery. As for Carrie and the others, they also looked over with surprise. The angel in white nodded. "Yes, actually, there are no absolutes in the recovery area. Although in theory, the patient is out of danger and only needs post-treatment and rehabilitation training, nothing is absolute. It depends on the person, and it varies from person to person." "In that case, you're a very good doctor," Silin praised. Although this woman had changed her coat, the smell of medicine was still there. It was a few surgeries that were needed for emergency treatment and major surgery. Moreover, those kinds of surgeries were very exhausting, and even robots couldn't replace them. It was no wonder that this woman ate a big plate of food after the surgery. However, Celine guessed that this woman should be the chief surgeon. Even if she was not the chief surgeon, she was still a very important assistant. It must be said that it was very rare for someone to have such ability at such a young age. She was brimming with talent. In response to Silin's praise, the angel in white didn't be modest. She smiled and nodded, continuing to drink from the cup. Now, Callie and the others mostly admired her. Although they didn't like to hear the word doctor most of the time, it was true that they mostly admired her. Moreover, they were combat personnel who were often injured, and they knew the value of a good doctor. Carrie, Xiao Shang, and the others gave Silin a look. Try to poach her, deputy captain. She was a talent, and they were in urgent need of talents. Although Lycrabe would sometimes make a guest appearance as a doctor, his main profession was a pharmacist. As for things like surgery, he rarely did it. Therefore, he was very supportive of recruiting a doctor. However, the problem was that even if she was a very experienced doctor, not to mention whether she was willing to give up her job here to join Vanguard, the consideration of her character was a big problem. A shrewd doctor could unknowingly cause a person's death, and it seemed to be just an accident. She would be completely out of the circle of responsibility. Naturally, Silin knew the stakes involved, and so did Callie and the others, so they didn't continue to say anything. At this moment, a noise came from not far away. It was obvious that a few young people were surrounding an old man and a child. The young man in the lead pointed at a stain on his sleeve and said loudly. He was very domineering, and his vulgar words flowed out. He must have said similar things on a daily basis. The other young people punched and kicked the old man who was lying on the ground. The old man protected the child in his arms, and the child was already sobbing. Many people around saw this scene, but no one came out to stop them. They didn't even dare to look at the young man in the lead and left in a hurry. F***. How can there be such people? Carrie stood up and prepared to go over. Xiao Shang and the others also prepared to stand up. I advise you not to cause trouble, or more people will suffer, the angel in white said. Why? Silin asked. Although people with a discerning eye knew that this was only a small matter. It should be that the child accidentally touched the young man's sleeve while playing football, and the young man's sleeve was dirty, which caused him to be beaten up. Actually, as long as you don't intervene, he can just beat them up and no one will die. Moreover, the old man and the child will receive better treatment later. However, if you intervene, not only will you not be able to save the old man and the child, you will also get yourself into big trouble. Carrie's eyebrows were knitted together. He never liked these twists and turns. Silin patted Carrie and asked him to sit down. Xiao Shang and the others also sat down again and looked at the development of the other side with dissatisfaction. The angel in white looked at Celine with some surprise. She didn't expect the leader of this group to be such a young guy, and he was far calmer than the others. Suddenly, the beauty in white thought of something. She carefully looked at Celine and the others again, and her gaze made them start to have goosebumps. "Cough that. Who is that bastard?" Carrie said to divert his attention. Retracting her gaze, the white-clothed beauty smiled in disdain. The crown prince of this region went overboard playing with women and got himself into trouble. Thus, he was sent here by his father to seek refuge. But while he managed to seek refuge, the people in the rehabilitation center suffered. "If I were his old man, I would have killed him a long time ago," Carrie said mercilessly, and he even pinched his fingers a few times as if he felt something. "There are a lot of people who want to kill him, but none of them succeeded." The angel in white pointed at the robots floating in the air. Some were service type, and some were navigation type. These robots will sometimes turn into hardcore bodyguards. After all, this rehabilitation center was opened by his old man, and he's very protective of his precious son. Also, they have a lot of connections with the higher-ups of the famous hospital in Sector E attached to it. As long as he doesn't kill anyone, those people won't make a sound. "Then we being monitored if we badmouth him right now?" Beaver looked around. The restaurant's service robots' eyes were flashing, but they were mainly looking in that direction and no longer paid attention to the people at the table. "It's fine as long as we don't fight. There are a lot of people who badmouth him. If that's the case, then why do so many people come here for rehabilitation treatment when they know this guy's character?" Celine asked. "Because it's cheap for the patients and high for the doctors." The beauty in white answered. It was true that this was a very practical problem. For people who were short of funds and poor conditions, this place was undoubtedly a very good choice. "Didn't they say that evil will be rewarded with evil?" Tang Qiuqiu said. This was a phrase she learned later on, and although it was sneered at by many people, she still remembered it very clearly. Evil will be rewarded with evil. The beauty in white smiled, but the meaning in her eyes was unclear. She said in a low voice, "Maybe." The beating was finally over, and an old man and a young man were carried away by a few medical staff. According to the beauty in white, they would receive better treatment for free. The young leader was still cursing. He accepted a cup of water from his lackey and gulped it down abruptly. However, because he drank too quickly, he choked. This choking was endless. In the end, because he choked too much, he was rushed to the emergency room by the medical staff. On the dining table in front of the beauty in white, the little rabbit shook her drooping ears and jumped onto the chair. Then, she jumped onto the ground and glanced at the beauty in white before leaving. The beauty in white looked at the remaining carrots on the plate and ignored the little rabbit who jumped away. However, the corner of her lips curled slightly, and her eyes were deep. Carrie looked at the rabbit and was about to say something, but Celine signaled him with his eyes. He shook his head and continued to eat. 5 minutes later, there was a commotion over there. Whether it was the doctors or the nurses, they all looked as if it was the end of the world. And the little rabbit jumped back at some point, jumped onto the chair, and then jumped onto the table to eat the remaining carrots. Chapter 181. Many doctors in white uniforms rushed over from other areas of the rehabilitation center. Their foreheads were covered in sweat, but they didn't even bother to wipe it off. They rushed into the rehabilitation center in a much more urgent manner than usual. A few young nurses were so anxious that they cried. The building was probably packed with people. Some of the doctors and nurses who didn't manage to squeeze and were pacing around anxiously. They looked inside from time to time and asked the people around them, "What happened over there?" Carrie asked. The few of them looked at the beauty in white. The question was directed at her. However, the beauty in white shrugged, indicating that she didn't know either. Celine and the others looked at the beauty in white with a strange expression. Then they looked at the rabbit that was chewing on a carrot. They had a feeling that they knew something. Huimao stared at the white rabbit on the table not far away. He could confirm that this small white rabbit was indeed similar to a normal rabbit. Its physique could only be considered healthy, but it wasn't super quality like Xiueqiu. There was also no abnormal energy fluctuation on its body. In conclusion, this was a normal lop-eared rabbit. However, This fellow that was no different from a normal rabbit gave Hui Mao a strange feeling. He couldn't explain why, but it was extremely strange. Silin also looked at the rabbit on the table. If he wasn't mistaken, the rabbit's eyes were still a little red when it came back. It only slowly turned black when it jumped onto the chair. This rabbit was definitely related to what happened over there. However, since the beauty in white didn't admit it, they wouldn't ask further. 10 minutes later, an aircraft flew over. It even knocked off a corner of the building without anyone saying anything. Then, a long canister was carried out from the building's facade. Silin and the others only saw the canister being carried up. However, there were many people blocking the way, so they couldn't see what exactly it was. "What is that?" Xiaoshang asked. The beauty in white didn't explain. Instead, it was Lycrabe who explained it. In layman's terms, it's a device that can seal a dying person inside, while maintaining the state they were in before they were sealed. Sometimes, when an injured person isn't in a place that has rescue drugs or equipment, and the doctors are at their wits' end, they will seal the injured person in a canister like this and transport them to a suitable place for subsequent rescue. "So, there's a dying person in the tube?" Carrie asked. Lycrabe looked at the aircraft in the distance. It could be a dying person, or it could be someone whose heart stopped beating not long ago. Then, could it be? Xiaoshang saw the service robot that had just left came back into the shop. He didn't finish his sentence, but gave it a look. Everyone knew who Xiaoshang was referring to. The young man who had been arrogant and domineering was sent in after choking on his water. As they were talking, Silin caught a glimpse of a figure. "Dias is coming." "Where? Where?" Hearing Silin's words, Carrie and Xiaoshang stopped discussing and quickly looked around. Two people walked over from afar, a man and a woman, holding each other's arms. It was Dias and Asha. "Vice Captain." "Ahem, Brother Dias." Carrie smiled and changed the way he addressed them out of habit. He stood up and ran over. Carrie, Beaver, and the others went over to greet them. Silin added a few dishes suitable for recovering patients and added a few stools. "Long time no see." Diaz came over and gave Silin a big hug. "I went out for a stroll and missed you." The broken arm had already been redirected and differentiated, and the recovery was going well. There were a few ways to regrow a severed arm. One could use the body's specific tissue cells to carry out tissue culture, complete the formation of an arm outside the body, and then reattach it with surgery. There was also in situ polycloning, but those were all induced outside the body. In order to achieve the perfect reconstruction of the arm, Lung chose the most painful method, which was the directional differentiation of the main body. During the core therapy, Dias's severed arm would undergo directional induction. In order to accurately induce the shape of the arm, anesthesia could not be injected. The main body would have to endure all the pain brought about by the induction. Not everyone could endure that kind of pain. So many people prefer to go for external induction. However, the directional induction of the main body would allow the new arm to be more compatible with the main body. As a hunter, it was obvious that Dias would benefit from this method. Silin gave a thumbs up. "True man." Carrie, Beaver, and Xiaoshang also agreed. "True man." However, no matter how one looked at them, their gazes were extremely perverted. They were still scanning back and forth between Dias and Asha. After Asha glared at them with a straight face, they finally became more serious. However, Asha's face was obviously flushed. Even though she was keeping a straight face, she did not have her usual imposing manner anymore. When Asha was not paying attention, the others winked at Dias with an expression that said, "We all know." "Io, my dear little sugar ball, I miss you so much." Dias picked up Tang Chiochio and tossed her up. This is really a bear. I thought it was a bear-shaped backpack." Dias looked at Chiochio, who was on Tang Chiochio's back. He smiled and reached out his hand to rub Chiochio's head and pinched its round ears. It feels good. I wonder how much food did it eat to get this fat." Chiochio grinned. "Hello, big brother Dias." This time, Dias and Asha were shocked. Even the beauty in white looked at it curiously. It could actually talk. This made Chiochio's grin even wider. "Don't be fooled by this guy's face. He's actually a bad guy, as bad as the Miantuan." Carrie sneered. The Miantuan opened its mouth and jumped on Yudi's shoulder. It seemed to be refuting Carrie's words, but Carrie ignored it. Therefore, when Carrie picked up the spoon to scoop up the meatball, the Miantuan popped out its long tongue and snatched the meatball away. After eating it, it smacked its lips and hid behind Beaver's neck to show off to Carrie. "Diarrhea, you'll die," Carrie said angrily. However, the Miantuan was a variant of the chameleon species. It had no fear of raw or cooked meat. Otherwise, it wouldn't have encouraged Hui Mao and the rest to pry open Carrie's storage cabinets. Silin then introduced Yudos, Lycrabe, and Chifeng to Dias. Dias was very satisfied, sincerely satisfied. People who could satisfy Dias gave Beaver and the rest a reassurance. "All right, let's sit down and talk. Boss, if there's anything else you want to eat, just order it. I'll pay for it today." Silin smiled. "Yeah, brother, sister-in-law. What do you want to eat?" Before Carrie could finish his sentence, Asha glared at him with a red face. Although Carrie didn't say anything, he was still smiling. Dias and Asha didn't sit down immediately. Instead, they looked at the beauty in white. In fact, Silin had already noticed Dias and Asia's attitude towards the white-clothed beauty who was sitting there calmly without the slightest intention of avoiding suspicion. Since Dias didn't say anything, it meant that they actually knew each other. Sure enough, Dias smiled and pointed at the beauty in white. He said to Silin and the rest, "This is Dr. Meg Nicole Tico. She's a very good doctor. It's all thanks to her that my arm recovered so quickly." After saying that, Dias turned to Tico. "Tico, come over and share a table." Tico, the beauty in white, looked at the white rabbit that was gnawing on the last bit of radish and replied, "Forget it, you guys eat first. I'll go back after Little White finishes eating. I just had a major operation and need a rest. Then we'll talk after you've rested." "All right." Tico scooped up the white rabbit that had finished eating the radish and put it back into the big pocket of her white overalls. She said goodbye to Dias and left. "Wow, Brother Dias, is that beauty really that good?" Xiao Shang came over and asked. "You little rascals, don't worry about it." Dias laughed and scolded them. At the same time, he winked at them, telling them to talk when they got back. Therefore, at the dinner table, they only talked about Dias's treatment and the condition of the others. Hearing that everyone was recovering well, the atmosphere at the dinner table was quite relaxed. After dinner, the few of them gathered in Dias's ward. Although it was called a ward, in fact, in the rehabilitation center, the patients' wards were similar to apartments. It wasn't crowded for more than 10 people to move around in it. After sitting down, Dias said, "When I came back, I heard some rumors that something happened to the Crown Prince here. He was sent to the main hospital for treatment." "Yes, we've all been watching this." Silin told Dias about what happened at the time. "The whole process was witnessed by us and Dr. Tico, but Dr. Tico's rabbit ran out." Hearing Silin mention the rabbit, Asha, who was massaging Dias, smiled. "It doesn't look like there's anything special about the white rabbit," Carrie said. He was mainly thinking about the rabbit's appetite. The radish on the plate was not much, just a little bit, not even enough to fill the gaps between Shueqiu and Hui Mao's teeth. However, the rabbit ate for so long. This should be the appetite of a normal rabbit, right? The others also opened their ears to listen. "If that's the case, the Crown Prince definitely won't survive," Dias said with certainty. Oh, Silin was very curious about this. Just like Wheeze, he couldn't tell what was so strange about the rabbit. In terms of physique, the rabbit was different from an alien beast. It couldn't even jump a meter high, and it couldn't withstand blades, spears, or clubs. However, Silin just felt that the rabbit was very strange. Dias was silent for a while, then said, "You all know that I'm an atheist, but there are some things in this world that science can't explain. Maybe the current technology hasn't reached the level to explain the causes, but no matter what, there are some things about the rabbit that are difficult to explain. So supernatural." The few of them were even more curious. Hui Mao, who was lying on top of Silin, sat up, his ears perked up. Dias didn't explain directly. Instead, he asked, "In the myth of creation, there was a guardian mentioned. Do you know about it?" Silin nodded, but Chifeng, Hui Mao, and Shueqiu didn't know about it. Looking at Yudo's and Tang Qiuqiu's expressions, He didn't understand either. Scylla explained, "In the myth of creation, the guardian will stay by the side of those who have committed the most heinous crimes and take away their souls so that they can no longer do evil." So you're saying, Carrie felt a chill down his spine. It's definitely not as supernatural as in the myth of creation, but the outcome of this rabbit's appearance is similar. Just like you said, how could the crown prince choke to death from drinking water? How could he not be saved with so many medical equipment and experienced doctors? Diaz said, "If it's not taking away the soul, then what is it?" Xiao Shang asked, shaking off the goosebumps on his body. Coincidence. Coincidence? Yes. As long as the rabbit exists, there will always be coincidences of one kind or another. Usually, these coincidences won't be taken seriously, but when all these coincidences are gathered together, the impact is far greater than people can imagine. It could be a problem with the trachea, throat, lungs, heart, and so on. It could also be some drug resistance or allergy in the body. No matter what it is, when all these coincidences are gathered together, the person is not far from death. Isn't that rabbit too strange? Why don't we go and pray to the gods? Carrie said, "I remember there's a sentence at the end of the myth of creation. In a materialistic world, idealistic people," Scylla said. Diaz smiled helplessly. "Indeed, we don't believe in ghosts, but some things are not certain. It's just like how people emphasize luck and emphasize that good will be rewarded and evil will be punished. So when Asha and I first learned about the rabbit, we were very conflicted." "That rabbit really didn't do anything?" Scylla asked. Asha, who was massaging Diaz's arm, paused for a moment and continued what she was doing. Diaz continued, "Let me tell you something. Asha and I saw it with our own eyes. One night, because Asha and I couldn't sleep, we went out to the corridor under the pergola to have a heart-to-heart talk. We talked about the 6th division. The night sky outside was beautiful, and there were many bright planets. We looked at the night sky, but Asha suddenly saw a white figure. Then we saw the little rabbit crawl along the protruding eaves of the 1st floor to a window on the 2nd floor. It stayed there until we heard an alarm from inside." An alarm. It was an alarm system that automatically sounded when a patient's life was in danger. Then the little rabbit left. Not long after, there was news that the person inside accidentally fell and hit his head when he woke up at night to go to the toilet and died. Throughout the whole process, the rabbit didn't come into contact with the person at all. After that, we got closer to Tico and learned more about the rabbit. A chill ran down Scylla's spine as he listened to Diaz's words. It was really just a weak rabbit that anyone could pinch to death. But wasn't this too strange? "Then the person inside is also a bad guy?" Scylla asked. "Indeed, he deserves to die," Asha said. Even Asha, who usually didn't like to talk, said so. It was definitely not a normal bad guy. Big brother, do you think people like us who have killed countless souls will attract the attention of that rabbit?" Carrie could feel the hairs on his body stiffening. Diaz said unhappily, "Aren't I the same? But I haven't seen the rabbit do anything for a long time." Other than Carrie, the others all heaved a sigh of relief. "So, I think the rabbit has its own judgment, just like the beast demon in the myth of creation." "Beast demon?" Carrie had a strange expression on his face. "I've never seen a beast demon, but I know a few that are similar." Carrie pointed out. Hui Mao, Miantuan, Shueqiu, and Chifeng all looked at Carrie. Carrie felt the hair on his body stand on end. "Let's not talk about the rabbit." Scylla pulled everyone back from their thoughts and asked Diaz. "Actually, Big Brother Diaz, you're saying this for another reason, right?" Diaz nodded approvingly. "The reason why I'm telling you all this is so you can understand Tico and the rabbit around her better. Don't be surprised or say something inappropriate when the time comes. If everything goes according to plan, Tico will be one of us soon." "Oh, we're finally going to have a beauty in our team," Xiao Shang cried. Hearing Diaz's words, everyone was elated. Not only did they have another eye-catching beauty, but this beauty was also a doctor, a young but experienced doctor. This was a good thing for the entire 6th division. A good doctor was harder to find than a good combatant. Logically speaking, with Dr. Tico's ability, she should be earning a good salary here, right? Why did she leave to join the hunter group? Scylla asked. They had always believed in Dias's judgment. Dias's judgment of people was not something that could be explained by science. Sometimes Dias would get lost, but he was very good at reading people. Scylla was actually not interested in the reason why Tico joined the hunter group. But just because he did not care did not mean that the others did not care. He only asked this question to clear everyone's doubts so that they could get along better in the future. She doesn't want to stay here anymore. We discussed this in detail after we came here for treatment and met Tico. I won't go into details about what happened in the middle. She seems to be a little tired of this place and said that she would rather be a hunter. However, Tico said that she wanted to give it a try first. If she thinks it's okay, she will officially join. Isn't our team lacking doctors? Lycrave's main profession is a pharmacist, and with Tico, it'll be even better. By the way, how's our team's combat power right now? Not bad. Everyone is improving, and there's a new member joining us. Besides, that white fatty isn't just for show. It would be strange if his combat power didn't increase, Scylla said. As expected, you are more suitable for that position than I am. Dias patted Scylla's shoulder and said sincerely, with you around, I can relax a lot. During his time as the sole vice-captain, Dias had always been depressed. In fact, not long after he became the vice-captain, he knew that he was not suitable for the position. He had been looking for a suitable candidate until Scylla joined the 6th team. Hey, Carrie, what are you laughing about? Dias laughed and kicked Carrie, who had his head lowered and was laughing. About that, I was thinking after Dr. Tico joined us. Rabbit joined us too. If that's the case, then let me give you an example. Let's say the enemy sniper was going to shoot you in the heart, but his hand twitched and he missed. Carrie said happily. Everyone fell silent. Chapter 182. The other members of the 6th Division who came to Sector E with Dias for treatment also sent messages one after another. They said that they would gather at this planet's port in a day and return to Sector K together. After chatting with everyone for a while, Dias called Scylla to find Tico. The others rested in Dias's ward, and Asha went to handle the paperwork to leave the rehabilitation center. Dias had become much more restrained after he became friends with Asha. He was no longer as frivolous as before, at least on the surface. He did not wink or whistle when he saw a beautiful nurse. He looked like a gentleman. You've become much more restrained. Scylla teased. Cough. It can't be helped. People with families are helpless. That was what he said, but Dias had a smug look on his face. Smug my ass. Scylla shot him a disdainful glance and continued. If that's the case, when are we going to hold a proper wedding? We may be in a relationship now, but it's not good without a title. Asha's culture should value this a lot, right? When the time comes, we can call her sister-in-law. Yes, that's a must. But Asha is alone, and my brother is the only direct relative I have. After some discussion, we decided to hold the ceremony at the 6th Division's base in Vanguard headquarters. Dias sighed and continued, although I lost my arm because of Asha has been by my side all this time, especially during the core treatment. I couldn't even move for many days, and Asha was the one who took care of me. She didn't mind it and took care of me personally. You see, for people like us who are constantly on the edge of danger, it's enough to have someone take care of us all the time. I have my own reasons for not wanting to be a lieutenant commander, but Asha did give up the position because of me. Before this, I was planning to accompany her to the famous scenic spots of the various sectors after our wedding. I've seen the little garden you and Chocho went to, and I really want to go. But now the plan has to change. Asha's idea is to at least wait until the situation has completely stabilized, and only then will there be a chance. We can't take any risks. Scylla nodded. Right now, he didn't know what the situation at Sector S was like. The A-Team hadn't made any public information, and the major media inside the League of Stars had only described it in a few words. The real core of the situation was very vague. Suddenly remembering something, Dias stopped in his tracks. He undid the top 2 buttons of his shirt and pulled them down, revealing a tattoo on his chest. Scylla's mouth twitched. Asha's name was tattooed on Dias's chest. Judging from the handwriting, it wasn't Dias's handwriting. Dias was so happy that his eyebrows were raised. Asha did it herself. In other words, In other words, Asha tattooed my name on the same spot. Holy shit, this is so mushy. Scylla shook off the goosebumps on his body and pretended not to see the expression on Dias's face that said, jealous of me, right? Jealous of me, right? You worship me now, right? All right, there's something I need to ask you. Dias suddenly put on a straight face and said, what is it? Do you know Yu Linglong of the Yu family? Scylla frowned and nodded a little helplessly. You know the Yu family, don't you? I don't know much about them. When I was in Seven Lights, I only knew that her name was Linglong, but I didn't know that her surname was Yu. I heard some people talk about her later, but the only thing I know is that the Yu family has great influence on the political scene of the entire League of Stars. It's not just the political scene. The Yu family is inextricably linked to the military, business, and academia. Rumor has it that one of the Heavenly Edict 4 generals is surnamed Yu. Scylla's pupils shrank. This was the first time he had heard such detailed information about the Heavenly Edict 4 generals. If one of the Heavenly Edict 4 generals was surnamed Yu, then the Yu family was far more complicated than he imagined. No wonder Lung didn't want to provoke them. At this point, Dias's expression turned odd. He looked at Scylla carefully and said, you can't be considered handsome right now. In fact, you're not even as handsome as I am. How did the little princess of the Yu family fall for you? Is it because of her first impression? You look like a pretty boy back then. Scylla did not say anything. He did not want to dwell on this topic. Scylla did not want to talk about it, but Dias was not going to let it go. Sai kid, the Yu family girl has helped us a lot. She's partly the reason why we could receive treatment so smoothly and peacefully. There is only one best medical area in Sector E, and most of the core healers were there. There were so many people in the League of Stars, so Dias's group might not necessarily run into big trouble, but there should be a lot of small frictions. However, Dias ran into Yu Linglong while he was receiving treatment at Sector E. In reality, Yu Linglong was the one who volunteered to help him. Only Dias and Asha knew about this. The rest of the Six Squad did not know about Yu Linglong's appearance, and they had wondered how the treatment went so smoothly. Listening to Dias's words, Scylla sighed on the inside. I guess I owe that girl one. I know that the girl only helped you because of you. Otherwise, with her background, there's no need for her to bow down to anyone, not even the Big Four, let alone people like us who aren't even members of the A-Team. That being said, the A-Team might not be higher than us in her eyes. Dias let out a low chuckle and patted Scylla's shoulder. You're not bad, kid. You even managed to get your hands on someone from the Yu family. Big brother, you're using vulgar words again. Ahem, I'll be vulgar once in a while. We're people with families, so we can't be vulgar all the time. That being said, although the Yu family is a complicated family, no one can interfere in matters of the heart. You know, I may not be good at other things, but I'm a good judge of character. That girl from the Yu family is serious about you. As for how the A-Team will think of you in the future, don't mind it. If you really like you, don't care what other people think of you. We'll see. They stopped talking about Yu Linglong. Dias had only mentioned it to Scylla because Yu Linglong had helped him before. Yu Linglong's help was for Scylla to see, so if he didn't mention it, it would be too disappointing for the girl. The building that Dr. Tico lived in was a separate building that was more than 100 floors tall. Doctors like her were treated quite well here, and the living space was also quite large. When Dias and Scylla came to visit, Tico had just woken up from her nap. Dias and Scylla had previously imagined a single woman's apartment. Based on Tico's personality and style, it should be neat and tidy, and the decorations should be very practical. In fact, it was indeed neat and practical, with nothing fancy about it. However, the tidiness and practicality made Scylla Helong feel a little horrified. There were anatomical diagrams of organs on the wall, and there were three-dimensional models of the skeleton and overall muscle structure as decoration. The curtains and other things were printed with molecular formulas, which are the drugs that were important to the patient during and after the surgery. There were three-dimensional patterns on the floor, which were large sections of antibodies. It was unknown who the antibodies belonged to. In short, Scylla and Dias stood at the door, their eyelids twitching, and they didn't make a sound. What's wrong? Are you scared? Tico handed them 2 glasses of water to calm them down. Dr. Tico, you're too unique. Diaz smiled sheepishly. Scylla quickly accepted it. He looked around and saw that the rabbit was sleeping in a small, specially made room. The white fur on its body could be seen through the round hole in the door. It was much quieter than the average rabbit. When Diaz and Scylla came in, the rabbit only moved a little and didn't respond. It was probably sleeping again. If one didn't know about those mysterious things, no one would think that this rabbit was anything special. All right, let's get down to business. Tico had always been swift and decisive, and she didn't like to talk nonsense. After hearing Tico's words, Diaz didn't delay any longer. He put down the glass and pointed at Scylla. He's Scylla. I believe you've already guessed it. Since it was time for them to know each other, there was no need to say too much and went straight to the point. Dr. Tico, Brother Diaz has already told me about your situation, but before you make a decision, I'd like to make a few points clear. Tico looked at Scylla and didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. In a hunter regiment, especially AB squadron like ours that is still developing, even the best doctors don't get much of a fixed salary. Everyone in the regiment has a fixed salary, and most of them rely on their characters to earn it. They don't get a stable and high salary like here. I don't care about that. I've saved up enough money over the years, Tico said. Also, there are many rules in the regiment. This is something Diaz has already told me. It's fine, I'll abide by it. In Vanguard, you can have more freedom, but there's absolutely no room for betrayal. This is something everyone who joins a hunter regiment must know. Of course, I don't like traitors either. After saying a few more things, Scylla noticed that Tico had done some research on the rules of a hunter regiment and had even thought about some of her future plans. This person was well prepared. All right, I'm glad that you're joining Vanguard Division 6. Oh, right. I can only recommend you as a vice captain. When the time comes, the captain of the 6th Division and the other vice captains will decide on your official qualifications. Also, there will be a few other squads that you'll have to choose from. I'll choose you. I'm quite satisfied with your squad, Tico said with a smile. And Whitey will have a companion. Their squad had the most animals in the 6th Division, and none of them were simple animals. Someone once joked that in the 6th Division, it was better to offend the humans than the animals there. Then there's nothing else, Scylla said and looked at Diaz. Diaz shook his head, indicating that he had nothing else to add. Where are you leaving? Tomorrow. After explaining the meeting time and arrangements, Tico promised that she would be there on time. There was no way Tico was going to openly travel with Diaz and the others here. If he left with them after resigning, then his men would definitely have objections and might even cause trouble for him. Tico hated those cynical and hypocritical bastards the most, but they just had to be the ones in charge. The next day, at the appointed time, Scylla and the others waited in front of the aircraft at the port. The people from the 6th Division also arrived one after another. Tico was very punctual. She was wearing a dark trench coat and glasses. The rabbit should be in her pocket. After confirming that everyone had arrived, Scylla asked Beaver and the others to start the aircraft and prepare to leave. Not long after Scylla's aircraft left, a person stood at the port not far from where their aircraft had been parked. At the same time, he turned on his communicator and said, "Tell Miss that they've left safely. You'll be responsible for the rest." Scylla and the others' flight was very smooth. They originally thought that they would run into some trouble, but in fact, it was unbelievably smooth. Carrie and Udos were still sighing at each other. They thought that they would have to fight when they came out. Even if they ran into some small fry, it would still be good. Their hands were itching, really itching. Scylla did not say anything. Diaz and Asha did not continue the topic either. They discussed the possible future plans of the 6th Division with everyone else. Huimao lay on Scylla's shoulder and swept Scylla's face with his tail. "What's wrong? Are you pretending to be deep?" Scylla carried Huimao down from his shoulder and placed him in his arms. Huimao was about to continue asking questions, but Scylla's scratching of his chin made him feel very comfortable. He let out a purr and rubbed his head, feeling sleepy. Scylla scratched Wheeze's chin. "You're thinking about something." The smoother their trip was, the stronger the Yu family was. Although Yu Linglong might not be able to mobilize a lot of forces, it was enough for them to pass through Sector E. In fact, it wasn't just Sector E. Their journey from Sector E to Sector K was very smooth. They did not run into any unusual situations. Sometimes, the border between sectors was pretty chaotic. At the very least, there were robbers, and as long as they didn't look like a big force, a single space plane or carrier could be intercepted. But this time, they clearly saw two starships approaching them with bad intentions, but they left soon after. This caused Carrie to sigh for a long time. In fact, it wasn't just Carrie. A lot of people who were receiving recovery treatment were itching to do something. After all, they had been idle for a long time, and it was only natural that they were itching to do something. Dias and Asha had lectured them about their mood. This was a critical period, so why the hell were they itching to do something? If they really were itching to do something, then they could go spar with the other squads after they returned to Sector K. Chiefin and Shuecho didn't think it was a pity. They didn't feel much if they didn't run into a chaotic battle. This was their first time participating in a mission, and although they felt that the mission was dangerous at first, they felt that it was relatively easy later on. Still, they couldn't help but be excited. Just look at how Chiefin was wagging his tail, and it was obvious just how happy he was. After returning to Sector K and the Stronghold without a hitch, the people who received medical treatment were all very excited. They immediately went to catch up with their friends after they returned. There were a lot of people who were shocked by Silen's easy mission. When they saw that there wasn't even a big scratch on the space plane, they knew that this trip was one hell of a stroke of luck. However, before Silen could discuss Dr. Tico's problem with the lieutenant commanders, a communication call from the A Squadron summoned him away. "What's wrong? Who told you to go over?" Dias asked. After a moment of silence, Silen answered, "Nada." Nada, the former commander of the 3rd B Squadron. He was arrested during the incident 50 years ago and imprisoned in Sector S's prison. Since Nada was already at the A Squadron stronghold, it meant that the people at Sector S had completed their mission well and brought Nada back safely. Nada, the person who had a deep relationship with Enji and Komunidin. Why did he come looking for him the moment he returned from Sector S? With Silen's current status as a lieutenant commander, he couldn't enter the A Squadron stronghold without a pass. Therefore, Nada had told him that Falvey would be coming to fetch him. As Nada's son and the current commander of the 3rd B Squadron, Falvey had the same rite of passage as Schotten. Falvey flew a plane over, and there was a squadron's emblem on it. Nada was probably the one who had the right to move a plane like this. When they saw Falvey, some of the 6 squad people were shocked. Everyone knew about the squad leaders of Vanguard. Not to mention that Falvey never had a good attitude towards the people of other squads. In fact, Falvey's face was pretty expressionless to begin with, and wearing the title of squad leader made him look very mature and authoritative. However, according to the people of the 3rd Squad, Falvey treated them pretty well. Falvey was as expressionless as the rumors said, but the fact that he was able to get off the plane and say a few words to Silen was already an incredible feat. Dias felt that if it were any other lieutenant commander, Falvey probably wouldn't even get off the plane. He would have just sat on the plane. It probably wasn't Falvey's own will, but not his order. It was true that Falvey was still puzzled even now. He had risked his life to rescue his father safely, and the battle at Sector S's 5-level prison was simply too intense. Of the 10A Squadron people sent out, 4 were heavily injured and almost lost their lives there, and the rest were more or less injured as well. There were a few people who couldn't be rescued from Level 4 prison, but it was already an incredible feat to be able to rescue so many people. The problem was that Nada was summoned by an old friend the moment he returned, and after he had a chat, he asked for Silen, the newly appointed lieutenant commander of the 6th Division. Nada had been a squad leader for many years, and a mere lieutenant commander was nothing in his eyes, much less a lieutenant commander of another squad who had just been promoted. However, he couldn't resist his father's constant reminders, so Falvey reluctantly drove the plane his father had sent out to pick him up himself. Falvey's first impression of Silen was, he didn't look like much. He looked a little dumb, and he was too young. He didn't have much of a sharp aura around him, and he was very gentle. "You're Silen." Falvey's voice was stiff and emotionless. This was also one of Falvey's great qualities as a squad leader. His face was expressionless, and even his voice was devoid of emotion. It was exactly because of this that his subordinates found him mysterious. Yes, I am. Scylla didn't care about Falvey's attitude at all. He would treat him however he wanted to. Falvey nodded expressionlessly. Let's go. Then came silence. A long silence. After Scylla boarded the plane, he saw that Falvey didn't want to speak, so he didn't ask any questions. He closed his eyes and rested for a moment. Just like that, the duo arrived at the A Squadron's base in silence. The plane landed at a place. This wasn't the place Scylla had come the last time, but according to the authority level, this place was a little higher. Chapter 183. Falvey led Scylla towards a semicircular building that wasn't too tall. He didn't say anything as he carried out his identity verification. Then, a scanning screen jumped out from the door and scanned both of them. After confirming their identities, they entered the building and took the vertical staircase all the way to the 5th floor. They arrived beside a door. "Father, I've brought him here," Falvey said. The door beeped open after Falvey's voice. There was an old man sitting in the room. He wasn't that old, but he looked like he had been through a lot. Plus, his hair was white. Based on Falvey's hair color, Nada shouldn't have white hair, so could only be acquired. Nada wasn't necessarily much older than Bart or Sombaleruo, but from the looks of it, 50 years in prison was a torturous period for Nada. "Father." Falvey's expression was much gentler when he faced Nada. The estranged aura from before was gone. Nada smiled. Unlike Falvey, Nada's smile was very kind. For some reason, Nada was feeling a little sad right now. Maybe it was because he had just returned from Sector S. When Scylla and Falvey arrived, Nada was holding a book. It was a paper book, and it looked a little old. "Sit, Scylla." Nada pointed at a chair beside him before turning to Falvey. "You may leave first. I'll call you later." Falvey opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He left in silence, but his eyes looked a little unwilling. After Falvey had left, Nada looked closely at Scylla like he was looking at a junior that he valued. "I never thought that the 6th Division would produce someone like you." Nada sighed. Scylla was puzzled. "Someone like me? What kind of person is that?" Noticing Scylla's puzzlement, Nada smiled again and asked, "You've read a couple of Communidan's notebooks in Enji's possession, haven't you?" Scylla nodded. Enji was brought out by Communidan, and Communidan was originally a member of Sonata's 3rd B Squadron. Nada sighed a little. When he heard the news of Enji's death, he didn't feel good. There weren't many people left in his original group, and Communidan was glad that he had transferred Enji to the 6th Division before the incident. But who knew that they still wouldn't be able to meet again after they left Sector S? Nada stood up and said to Scylla, "Come with me. This should be Nada's private place." After passing through several doors, Nada brought Scylla to a study room. Yes, a study room. There were many paper books in the study, and most of them were notes, diaries, and other related records. There were some books that Scylla knew were similar to the ones in his hands. They should all belong to Communidan. Most of the books in Enji's hands are duplicates, and they are incomplete. All of Communidan's parasitic research records are here. All right, there's also this. Nada took out a thick notebook from a closet. This notebook was different from normal paper. It was a semi-electronic notebook, and, similar to some published newspapers, the pictures on it could be moved. Seeing Nada's cherished expression when he took out this thick notebook, Scylla carefully accepted it and looked at Nada in puzzlement instead of flipping through the records inside. Nada explained, "This is Communidan's unfinished work. We call it the Parasitic Code, and there are a lot of parasitic species recorded in it. Almost all of them were encountered by Communidan during his missions, but the records are incomplete. A lot of deeper research was cut off. One reason was that he didn't have much free time to research a particular parasitic species on its own, and the other reason was that conditions were limited. Many people, including the original members of the 3rd B Squadron, did not think highly of Communidan's parasitic research. Everything stopped after the incident 50 years ago. Then what are you? Scylla, if you want to research these things, you can come and look at them whenever you need them. Although these things are classified as confidential by the regiment, and non-core researchers are usually not allowed to come into contact with them, most of the A Squadron's researchers are not involved in these projects. In order not to let Communidan's research go to waste, I've decided to open this information to you. Although I'm very happy to come into contact with these things and see Senior Community's research results, Senior Nada, can you explain more clearly? Sillin still didn't know what Nada meant. Was he asking him to take over Community's research and continue his research? But he was the vice commander of his 6th Squadron right now. He might not have a lot of things to do normally, but he definitely didn't have much free time to specifically research these things. Nada shook his head. I just don't want Community's research to go to waste. To be honest, there are very few people who have truly realized the value of the parasitic code to this day, myself included. Maybe it's because I don't understand it, but after that incident, the regiment commander classified the parasitic code as a confidential document. Other than some core researchers, no one else knows about the existence of this record, and most of those who knew about it died 50 years ago. Nada's voice grew a little gloomy when he said this. It was obvious that he was remembering a bad past. You think too highly of me. Sillin didn't feel too happy because of Nada's words. Why would a man like Nada, who had just returned from Sector S, believe in Sillin's abilities so much? It definitely wasn't because of Engie. Sillin knew from Engie's diary that Engie didn't hold much weight in Nada's eyes. If it wasn't for Community, then Engie wouldn't even enter Nada's eyes. Nada stroked a notebook and said slowly, although I'm no longer the commander of the 3rd B Squadron and have directly joined the A Squadron after my return, and logically speaking, I shouldn't care about these things anymore. Kamanadine is a good friend of mine. Before he passed away all those years ago, he passed all of his research results to me, so I also have the right to choose this information. This is also a responsibility I have borne. I believe in his words. The things he valued so highly must be of extraordinary value. Even when I was in prison, I often thought about how to display the value of these things. After I came back, I learned about Vanguard's current situation, and I also learned about you, Sillin. Both Bart and Somba Leruo communicated with me, and they knew that I pay more attention to the parasites. That's why they recommended you, Sillin. However, it was only after I investigated that I realized that you're far more outstanding than I imagined. While saying this, Nada brought up a document. The information flashing on the light screen was very familiar to Sillin. It was information about the 2 parasites used to eliminate Poison Fong back then, and it was a very detailed analysis. The A Squadron's Core Research Institute must have done in-depth research on the 2 parasites at the time, or they wouldn't have come up with such a detailed conclusion. According to the explanation provided by the A-Team's Research Institute, both types of worms contain serial lethal genes that have been specially implanted in their bodies. As long as one of the serial lethal genes is activated, the worm will die, and the activation point is determined by time. Yes, although the planet was filled with the parasites released by Sillin and Huimao, the 2 parasites had a point of decline in their life cycle, and that point of decline was the moment when the lethal gene was activated. They would gradually die, and their colony would gradually decline towards extinction. Sillin did not wish for the entire planet to become a nest of parasites, or Vanguard would have a hard time taking down the entire planet. Not everyone had a physique like Sillin, and Huimao's rare species in the universe was even rarer. When he said this, Nada could not help but grin. You might not know this, but the previous commander of your 3rd B Squadron, Seru, was so happy that his face was about to blossom when he mentioned you. This time, Sillin was truly surprised. This was the first time he heard Seru's former commander's opinion of him. He did not think that his former commander would still pay attention to them. Oh, you might not know about Seru's situation. That guy just doesn't like to show off. I heard that the Amaos who was sent to Poison Fong to negotiate with the military was sent by Seru to negotiate with the military. That kid almost died of happiness. Actually, these people who were already mentioned as a squadron would often pay attention to the news of their former squadrons. When they gathered together, they would compare themselves with each other. It was just like how parents talked about their children. Who wouldn't want their child to have a Hall of Fame achievement? They couldn't wait to show off anything they had. However, Seru had been depressed for many years. During the days when the 6th Division was at a low ebb, every time Seru talked about it with Bard and the others, he would feel like killing his way to the 6th Division and beating up those disappointing brats. However, ever since the 6th Division came out of Sector Z, Seru gradually became more and more smug. Scylla aside, even Bart and Sombaleruo had praised Scylla a lot. Talent and ability weren't things that you could get just because you wanted to. Do whatever you want to do. Seru also said that you're the only person with a bit of drive in the 6th Division right now. Back then, Seru led the 6th Division to the point where they didn't have much autonomy and relied on him as their commander. But when Seru mentioned a squadron, the rest of them shriveled up. Nada said earnestly. Nada told Scylla to come here and look at the data if he needed it. Everything inside the room had been moved from Comunidin's place, and most people didn't have the right to look at the originals. In fact, they might not even have the right to see the duplicates. Naturally, Scylla knew about this. He couldn't miss out on the opportunity to see Comunidin's research results and related records. Scylla stayed in the study and flipped through the notes. He knew that there would definitely be surveillance cameras in the room, but he didn't want to bother with them. Right now, the most important thing was to memorize these things as soon as possible. With Scylla's memory, there was no need for duplicates. It was enough to flip through the originals once. There was no need for him to come here often in the future. After all, he didn't know when he would have the time to return to the stronghold after going on a mission with the team. Scylla realized that most of the time, Comunidin liked to record the information with his own hands. He especially liked to use the most common paper notebooks that had been abandoned in some places. The notebook that Scylla was holding was one of them. Flipping it open, he could see many records that were written down by Comunidin. Even the parasites were drawn by him. He had drawn many different types of parasites, and they were all vivid and lifelike. Comunidin mentioned in one of the notebooks that he would only have a deeper understanding of these creatures when he drew them with his own hands. From there, he would be able to understand their possible weaknesses and related ecological characteristics. Although Scylla knew that there were surveillance cameras in the room, he would never have thought that the people in front of the cameras were watching. "How much do you think he recorded?" someone asked. "I don't know." Nada shook his head. "This kid is amazing." The person could not help but laugh. "He's a good seedling, a rare seedling. It's rare to get such an evaluation from you, boss." The person that Nada called boss was the #1 leader of Vanguard, one of the 6 stars of Hunter, G-Phone. Scylla flipped through the pages very quickly. Even the book that was known as the essence of Comunidin's research, the Parasite Code. It looked like he was flipping through it casually, but in fact, Scylla had already memorized everything clearly. Scylla stayed there for 3 days. Halfway through, Nada sent someone to deliver food to him. The rest of the time, Scylla was flipping through the records in the study. Nada did not try to persuade Scylla and just let him be. 3 days later, Scylla finally stood up from his chair, stretched his slightly stiff limbs, and warmed up his muscles. 3 days of flipping through the records without rest and sleep had caused him to be highly focused and exhausted. At this moment, he could clearly feel the waves of exhaustion rolling over him. Rubbing his eyes, Scylla walked out of the study, bid farewell to Nada, and left. As usual, Falvey used Nada's plane to send Scylla back. However, the way Falvey looked at Scylla had changed. He did not know what Nada had told him. Falvey had even spoken a few words of his own accord, surprising Scylla greatly. The first thing he did after returning to the 6th Squad stronghold was to have a good sleep. He did not pay attention to Lycrabe's research and development progress. After a cursory glance, he confirmed that there were no problems for the time being, and that Lycrabe would be able to overcome them with a little more time. Scylla also ignored Yudi's research on the prison's defense system data he had stolen from Sector S. Before Scylla left, the note Yudi had slipped into Scylla's hands was for Scylla to steal the prison's defense system program and related data for research. Right now, Scylla's mind was filled with dense parasites, molecular formulas, and genetic strands that were flying around. He needed to digest them properly. Before Scylla prepared to go into closed-door cultivation, Diaz told him that he would be holding his wedding with Asha at the stronghold 10 days later. He told him that he must wake up on that day no matter what, or else he would be pulled awake by force. In reality, it did not take 10 days. Scylla slept for 8 days. During these 8 days, a lot of small things had happened. For example, Tico had officially joined the ranks. The 6th Division's Animal Legion had pried open carry storage cabinet, and Tico's residence was publicly acknowledged as the scariest place in the 6th Division. Regardless, Schotten was very satisfied with the current 6th Division. The division had always been filled with excellent talents, and when he was still in the A Squadron, the former Captain Theroux had taken care of him quite a bit. This flattered Schotten greatly, and it was worth mentioning that Theroux wanted nothing more than to drag Schotten over and give him a good beating every time he saw him. Diaz had a radiant smile on his face as of late. To quote Carrie's own words, people with families were just different. When they heard that Diaz was getting married, old and new friends who could not attend the wedding specifically sent him their congratulations. The wedding was to be held in the 6th Division's auditorium. Sillin gave them a big red packet. This was what Diaz had requested. He wanted something more practical and practical. Therefore, Sillin directly sent a 6-digit memory card over. Diaz was so happy that his eyebrows almost floated up. On the day of the wedding, Diaz was dressed very formally. He was in high spirits when it came to happy events. He walked into the auditorium with a smile on his face and held the hand of the bride, Asha. In front of them, the two little guys, Chifeng and Tang Qiuqiu, each carried a flower basket and scattered flowers along the way. Chifeng tried hard not to wag his tail, but when he was happy, it was difficult to control himself. His canines were smiling. This was the first time he had encountered something like this. It was the first time he had been together with so many people. He was very happy to experience such an atmosphere. During one of the performances, many people had to go up to offer their congratulations or perform. The most dazzling performance was Hui Mao and Lycrabe's duel, mechanical dance. When he heard the news that Lycrabe and Hui Mao were going to have a mechanical dance, Carrie looked at Lycrabe with a pitiful expression. Other people might not know Hui Mao's background, but he did, especially that mechanical form. Mechanical dance with such a strange creature? Wasn't that just asking for trouble? Originally, Sillin, Yudos, and Tang Qiuqiu were the only people who had seen these two monsters dance at Acerella's dance night in Sector F. Most people had never seen the atmosphere caused by these two guys dance. Therefore, when Lycrabe and Hui Mao took their first step to the beat, everyone's attitude changed. Once again, Lycrabe displayed the aura of the Wolf King of Dance Night on stage. Although it was not as good as Hui Mao, who already had the upper hand in the first place, the duo's violent dance still caused the entire audience to reach a climax. Even the other team leaders who were only here to go through the motions couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. This time, the 6th Division had produced quite a few monsters. Even Nada and the others' eyes were in deep thought. There was no need to prove it by force. The great hall that was dyed by the unique aura was already silent. According to Diaz, this wedding wasn't just a blessing for him and Asha. It was also a blessing for Lycrabe and Hui Mao's dance to become famous throughout Vanguard. It took a long time for the audience to realize that they were humans and not robots after watching the duo's violent dance. Although the current technology allowed robots to move no differently or even more smoothly than humans, the illusion of executing a programmed order lingered in everyone's mind for a long time. A feast was inevitable at a wedding, and there was no lack of gluttons in 6th Division, especially a certain white fatty who was running around with his feet wide open. Tico's little white was still nibbling on its carrot quietly, but its eyes would occasionally glance at Hui Mao, Qiuqiu, and the others. Not long after the wedding, the A Squad sent out news that the riots at Sector S had officially subsided. The subsiding of the riots at Sector S did not mean the beginning of peace. Perhaps a bigger wave was slowly approaching. Chapter 184. Sometime after Diaz's wedding, the A Squad sent word that the B Squadrons were to adjust their condition, stock up, and inspect their equipment. The A Squad had personnel who would be testing their starships with the latest weapons. Due to the incident at Sector S, all 10 B Squadrons temporarily returned to Vanguard Stronghold at Sector K, regardless of whether they were still on a mission or not. Vanguard B Squadrons were all gathered together, which was a rare occurrence. Beaver, Yudi, and the others had been watching from the sidelines when the A Squad sent over to equip the 6th Division with a new weapon system. The 6th Division's engineers were also watching carefully and seriously. After all, if they were to go out on a mission and something went wrong, there was no way the A squad could come along and repair it. They would have to rely on themselves. Before this, the engineers and technicians of the 6B Squadron had developed a few types of weapons and equipment based on those special ores. But this time, the A Squadron had developed something a little more sophisticated. They had modified the negative threats brought about by the previous weapon systems and increased their attack power and defense power while also increasing their own stability by a lot. Hui Mao yawned after watching for a while. He could basically understand these weapon systems by scanning them from the side, so it was boring to be called here by the Miantuan to watch the weapon installation. Hui Mao stuck out his butt, stretched his back, and licked his lips. Then, he decided to harass Silin at the lab. Right now, Silin, Lycrabe, and Tico were producing antibiotics together. The news from the A squad indicated that they were about to depart again, so they had to produce the antibiotics before they departed. After all, the experimental conditions on the starship couldn't compare to the conditions here, and there were a lot of restrictions. Lycrabe's eyelids twitched as he watched Hui Mao walk in openly and jump onto the lab table in front of him while holding a test tube in his hand. How the hell did this guy pass the system inspection and come in? This cat had truly given him too many blows. Every time he saw this bastard cat, he couldn't help but want to slap it a few times. However, Carrie once told him that if this cat didn't know how to be beaten voluntarily, he might not be able to draw the gray cat, even if there were 10 of him. What blow? I say, Lord Wheeze, are you here for an inspection? Hui Mao glanced at Lycrabe lazily and yawned. Where's Silin? The captain just went to look for him. Lycrabe took away the small bottles beside Hui Mao. This is not a place for you to play. Be careful of the liquid. It will hurt. Before Lycrabe could finish, Hui Mao curled his claws and grabbed one of the vials. He sniffed it and then handed it back to Lycrabe in disdain. Lycrabe shook his head helplessly and packed up the small bottles. Just as he was about to speak, Tico, who was in the sterile isolation room, started to rush him. Lycrabe took out the things he needed from the medicine cabinet. Beside him, there were 2 auxiliary robots helping to sort them out. Then, he placed them in the passage and sent them in after a few layers of scanning and sterilization. All right, let's go out and play. I still need to continue with my experiments. After that, Lycrabe walked to a small room outside the sterile isolation room to change into his isolation suit. Hui Mao did not stay in the room and left with his tail wagging. Watching Hui Mao leave the laboratory, Lycrabe breathed a sigh of relief. What a worrisome guy. After Hui Mao came out, he was about to go to the captain's office to look for Silin. However, he ran into Shueqiu on the way and was called by Shueqiu to watch the fun. The so-called fun was Qifeng's awkward shooting. Carrie and Tang Qiuqiu were teaching Qifeng how to shoot. Qifeng's fingers were getting more and more flexible, and he was gradually accepting the way of life that belonged to humans. In addition to shooting, there was also the piloting of fighter jets. Qifeng and Tang Qiuqiu were learning how to pilot a fighter jet. Based on the current situation, the use of fighter jets might increase a lot in the future. As the main combat personnel, how could they not know how to pilot a fighter jet? They had to be familiar with it. If they made a mistake during a chaotic battle, not only would they lose their lives, they might even kill their comrades. Carrie pulled out the fatty who was secretly laughing in the corner and tossed him a gun. This was a gun used by beginners, and it was much simpler. It was a metal bullet type, and its recoil wasn't that strong either. After getting the toy, Shueqiu was no longer in the mood to laugh at Qifeng. He picked up the gun with difficulty and began to practice shooting. 5 minutes later, Hui Mao was lying on the shelf next to him and yawned again. He tilted his head and looked for a long time before saying, "Clumsy." The fatty's round ears twitched as he turned to look at Hui Mao. "How much better do you think you are than me? At least I can still pick up a gun. What about you? You can't even pick up a gun with your claws, can you?" Hui Mao's ears flicked. He was obviously disdainful of this sentence. Why would I need a gun? He jumped down from the shelf and walked elegantly to Shueqiu's side with his head held high. He looked at the target in the distance and moved a few steps towards it. He turned back to look at Shueqiu. Continue shooting. Shueqiu didn't know what it was going to do. He raised the gun with his 2 chubby hands and shot. Hui Mao's tail also flicked at a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye. Beep, 10 points. The system's voice rang out. This was the first time Shueisha heard the system's voice after shooting for half a day. He hadn't even touched the side of the target before. Shueisha's mouth opened and closed repeatedly. He scratched his butt and head. You did this. Although Shueisha wasn't good at shooting, it didn't mean that he was stupid. On the contrary, his IQ was very high. He naturally knew that he wouldn't be able to hit the target with his ability. Huimao sat there with a worship me look on his face. He was very proud. Amazing. Shueisha happily went up to ask for advice. Humans had their own methods, but beasts had their own as well. Techniques that were suitable for humans might not be suitable for them. While Huimao and Shueisha were discussing the shooting techniques of beasts, Silin was in Shotten's captain's office. The lieutenant commanders were all present, so Shotten conveyed the A Squadron's message to them. Since the incident at Sector S had come to an end and all parties had calmed down, the A Squadron decided that the squads could move if they wanted to. However, there was a change now. The A Squadron hoped that the squads could work together and look after each other. It was too easy for a single B Squadron to get into trouble. 2 B Squadrons would form a group, and the 2 squads would coordinate the time and destination of the operation. They would also discuss and decide when to depart. 3 squadrons. The lieutenant commanders were puzzled. Why would 3 B squadrons volunteer to work together? Someone like Falvey wouldn't expect something like this to happen. However, when they recalled that Falvey had personally flown a plane to pick up Silin a while ago, the lieutenant commanders looked at Silin and pondered the reason behind it. Shotten tapped the table with his finger and said, "All right, let's not think about anything else. What I want to say right now is that 3B squadrons have a job at Sector G. Falvey is asking for my opinion. After all, we need 2 squads to work together right now, and we haven't even finished our vacation according to our original plan yet. So I'm asking for your opinion right now. Do you want to continue your vacation, or do you want to go according to our original plan, or do you want to go with the 3rd B Squadron? What is the 3rd B Squadron planning to do at Sector G this time?" Akai asked. "They're going to ship a batch of T-13 ores to the Robert family. According to the agreement, they will receive a handsome reward and a batch of robots made from the T-13 ores. Of course we're going. We've rested for such a long time, and the people who received treatment at Sector E have returned safely. Right now, everyone's itching for a job. If it wasn't because of what happened a while ago, they would have applied for a trip outside a long time ago." Lieutenant Commander Lu Suo said, "I agree. Our bones will rust if we rest any longer." Laro said. Watching agreed with their opinion. Zaya, Chasha, and Akai remained silent. Shotten turned his gaze to Silin. Although Silin was silent as well, Shotten knew that it wasn't that Silin hadn't made up his mind yet, but that he was still considering something. Sector G was the largest robot manufacturing center in the League of Stars. It was rich in a kind of ore, and it played an important role in the alloy material used to make robots. Several big families had built their manufacturing bases there. Noticing Shotten's gaze, Silin straightened his body and asked, "How much benefit will we get?" 46. We'll get 30%, the 3rd squad 70%, and we'll get 20% for the robots. They'll get 80%. Shotten answered. So little? Akai was a little dissatisfied with the distribution. They're the ones who found the T-13 mine after all. If it wasn't for the A Squadron's arrangement, they would have gone alone. They don't want anyone else to share the profits. That's true. The lieutenant commanders began exchanging opinions. In the end, they all agreed to go. It was 2 B Squadrons after all, so there shouldn't be any problems. Moreover, the profits they reaped from this operation were pretty good. After the group executive meeting, Silin left Shotten's office and walked back. Silin was thinking about the situation at Sector G. The Robert family was known as the Robot Kingdom in the League of Stars, and there were people in the family who worked in the military. Although they might not be able to compete with some of the other big families in terms of power, they were superior in technology, wealth, and background. These were the reasons why they were able to establish themselves as a big family in the League of Stars. Some people said that the Robert family members were born to work with robots, and Mohong had mentioned a few things about the Robert family back when Silin was learning how to assemble parts from Mohong. Their assembly accuracy was no lower than 99. 97%, and they were definitely a talented family. While he was thinking, he heard Hui Mao's voice. "Silin, you're back." It was obvious that the guy was in a good mood. Hui Mao rushed over and climbed up Silin's legs familiarly. He climbed up to his shoulder and slapped Silin's back with a smug look on his face. "What is it now?" Silin scratched Hui Mao's extended chin. "It's nothing. I just gave that white fatty some pointers, that's all." That was what Hui Mao said, but it was obvious that he was hinting for Silin to praise it. "Hey yo, Lord Cat, you've started teaching your students too." Silin played along with Hui Mao's intentions. "Oh, Silin, why did Shan look for you? Is it because there's work to be done?" "Bingo. Wow, meow my, I really want to show off my skills now." "Ahem, it's not like I have to fight." Seeing Silin looking at it sideways, Hui Mao corrected himself. "It's really annoying to be cooped up in here. If the squad wasn't busy, I would have suggested that you go out for a walk. There's no need for that now. The whole squad is on the move, but this time it's not just us. We're working with the 3rd B Squadron." While walking back, Silin told Hui Mao about the operation and the robots at Sector G. This had undoubtedly piqued Hui Mao's interest, but Silin also reminded Hui Mao not to expose his cyborg body unless it was absolutely necessary. Otherwise, the Robert family would not let him off the hook. Everyone in the 6th B Squadron became lively when they heard that there was a mission. Carrie, who had been listless for the past few days, was now on steroids again. Taking advantage of these few days of preparation, he summoned Chi Feng, Tang Qiuqiu, and Yudos over to teach them a good lesson. He explained how to handle some emergency situations during a mission. Before the operation, Lycrabe had finally produced an anti-growth drug with Tico's help. This undoubtedly boosted the 6th Division's confidence once more. Chiefing held his combat uniform and couldn't bear to let go of it. He especially liked the hole on the pants. There was an elastic band there, and it made it very easy to let his tail out. He put it on and tried it on. It was much more comfortable and sturdier than the clothes he passed to him before. He also had to choose his own weapon first. When Silin returned from Sector S, he told Carrie about how his wrist was easily cut off by a sword. While Carrie marveled at the strength of the enemy's weapon, he also mourned the GL credits he had spent like water. Every squad had a new member for this operation, and Silin's was the strangest of them all. There was a doctor, an apothecary, a couple of animals, and a non-human chieftain. Yudos took out the emblem he had been hanging inside. He was very happy that he could finally hang it outside openly. The rendezvous with Falvey was at the spaceport outside the planet. The spaceplanes from the 2B squadrons flew towards the few starships parked at the spaceport. The squad members followed their lieutenant commander and flew into the starship. The moment they returned to the familiar starship, Hui Mao immediately began his long-awaited territory patrol. This time, he brought Qiuqiu with him. The Miantuan and Whitey were standing on Qiuqiu's head. Whitey the rabbit was munching on a carrot while observing the surrounding scenery. It didn't need to walk anyway, so it looked pretty relaxed. Since Chiefing was still young and unfamiliar with many things, he stayed in a small room at Silin's place for now. If anything happened, Silin would be able to help him. Qiuqiu was obviously staying with Tang Qiuqiu, and the White Rabbit was staying with Tico. But these animals would gather together to play every day, and the Miantuan was growing happier and happier. In the past, he was alone, and when he was thrown out by Yudi, he could only lie in a corner and sleep all by himself. Later on, Hui Mao, then the white fatty Qiuqiu, and now the rabbit had joined them. Their army was growing stronger and stronger. Looking at the 4 animals lying there and playing a holographic flying chess game, Yudos wiped his face. They've all become spirits. They've all become spirits. The small starships of the B squadrons had merged with their main starships, so there were only 2 starships belonging to the 3rd B Squadron and the 6th Division flying in space. Inside the main control room of the 3rd B Squadron's main ship, Falvey sat on a chair and stared at the screen in front of him. He was as silent as ever, and the screen was displaying a 2-dimensional linear star path map of Sector G, but Falvey's thoughts were not on it right now. The reason Falvey treated Silin differently was because Nada had told him some things about Silin that day, things that even Shotten didn't know about. Information about the 2 parasites and how to accurately control the decline and death of the parasite colony wasn't something that just anyone could do. Falvey had seen the specimens of the two parasites before, and he had heard the A Squadron's researchers' evaluation of the two parasites. Artificial, modified parasites were like terrifying weapons. They didn't need strong radiation energy or firepower, and if they were allowed to reproduce on a normal planet without implanting serial death genes that allowed them to perform programmed deaths at specific times like robots, they could destroy an entire planet in a serious case. Nada said that Scyllin might be the only person in Vanguard who could continue Communidan's parasite code according to its original standards. It wasn't that Falvey didn't know the value of the parasite code. On the contrary, he knew its importance very well, especially after Nada's words. Right now, Falvey's opinion of Scyllin had changed a lot, and it was because of Nada's words that Falvey volunteered to cooperate with the 6th Division. That day, Nada looked at a document in her hands and said, "Azrael has Godfather, but as long as Vanguard exists, there may be an existence that is not inferior to Godfather in the future as well." This existence was Scyllin. While Falvey was thinking about Nada's evaluation of Scyllin, the existence Nada spoke of was sleeping soundly in his own bedroom. Previously, he thought that he would have to absorb the information left behind by Communidan in that state of sleep, but this time it was because he stayed up all night with Yudi and Beaver to study the prison's defense system at Sector S, and the reason why Fog, Wusha, and Azrael were able to hack into the prison's defense system and paralyze it. For the next few days, Yudi and Beaver couldn't take it anymore. They stopped twice to replenish their energy, but Scyllin didn't stop even once. At that time, he only needed to close his eyes to be filled with densely packed programs and formulas. If someone were to listen to a couple of relevant numbers in Scylin's ears, he would immediately substitute the numbers into those complicated formulas and calculate the results. It was a conditioned reflex at the time. If it wasn't for Scyllin, there was no telling how long it would take for Yudi and Beaver to finish their research. Right now, Scyllin, Yudi, and Beaver were all sleeping soundly on their own beds. They hadn't even cleaned their beards yet. Huimao jumped next to Scyllin, scratched Scylin's messy hair with his claws, and sniffed it. It smelled weird. "How many days has it been since I washed my hair?" Sneezing in disgust, Huimao jumped onto Chifeng's little bed, grabbed Chifeng's tail, and curled his body into a ball. Then, he too began to sleep. That chameleon said that the coming days might be harder, so he needed to conserve his strength. Yep, that's how he described it. Chapter 185. Their destination this time was the core planet of Sector G's Division F, Planet G, F-100. It was medium in size, and although it was designated as the core planet of Division F, it wasn't actually a rank A planet in terms of habitability. Instead, it was a slightly worse rank B planet. The owner of Planet GF-100 was called Robert Friends, and he was also the person who negotiated the contract with Falvey. The Robert family was a famous robot family in the League of Stars, but in reality, there were less than 100 of them in total. Compared to the other famous families in the League of Stars, they could be said to be the outlier of the outliers. Unlike the other families, the Robert family rarely had servants, bodyguards, and so on. Instead, they had high-fidelity robots, and a lot of people couldn't tell whether they were human or robot, even if they were standing in front of them. They could even fool some scanners. In the past, they only learned about the Robert family through electronic publications and other people's stories. But today, it was obvious that the people of the 3rd B Squadron and the 6th Division were speechless. The starship was docked at the spaceport outside the planet. Only most of the main combat personnel and a small number of support logistics personnel were heading there. Shotten had only brought 3 squads with him, and Scylin's squad was one of them. Compared to Falvey's squad, Shotten's squad was a lot more low-key. After all, they could only be considered as companions, and they wouldn't steal the limelight. After they got off the spaceplane, Scyllin looked at the flock of birds flying across the sky. Those are robot birds. Huimao wasn't bothered by the fact that these birds weren't carbon-based life forms. On the contrary, he was actually quite happy. As a rare species in the universe, its diet was very wide. Of course, it could eat carbon-based birds, but robot birds could be its food as well. It wasn't bad to change up his diet every once in a while. You'd better restrain yourself. These robot birds can detect the disappearance of even one of their monitors, and it'll be hard to explain when they trace their tracks back to you. Sillin poked Huemao's forehead with a finger. I know, I'm just saying. Even if those robots speak, I'll pretend that I don't understand them. Huimao licked his claws and took a deep breath. What a familiar smell. The smell of machinery. The layout of this planet was similar to that of a planet with a level of habitability. In fact, it looked even more beautiful. After all, robots would not create a lot of household waste. On the vast grassland, there were some people herding sheep. The grass was real grass, and the sheep were real sheep. However, the people were not necessarily the same. Perhaps they were all robots that looked like ordinary people. Falvey led the group through a path on the grassland. He stopped and said, "Follow the left side of this planet." It's this point. The place where they were standing was surrounded by grassy plains. The shepherds from before were nowhere to be seen, and no one else could be seen. Since it was agreed beforehand, it should be here. Let's wait, Shotten said to the people from the 6th Division. Since the two captains had said so, the others did not refute and obediently waited where they were. Chiefin was very excited to see this grassland. The planet he was from did not have such a beautiful grassland. Many animals loved grassland. Shuecho and Huimao were already rolling around on the grass, and Tico's little rabbit was released to eat. The Miantuan's body was the same color as the grass, so if one did not look closely, they would not be able to tell where it was. Actually, this planet was originally classified as a level B planet because of its lack of resources. However, under the influence of Robert Friends and his mech kingdom, the classification gradually changed. After all, there are too few people on this planet to eat. Most people only need to absorb light energy, Shotten explained to the group. This is the surprising thing about the Robert family. Below this grassland is still the mech kingdom, Yudi said, looking at the screen of the scanner. After this planet was modified, it became Robert Friends' kingdom, and Robert Friends himself is the king of this planet. Listening to Shotten and Beaver's words, Sillin also felt the movement coming from below the grassland. There was not much movement underground, and it could not be felt above the grassland. The reason why this grassland was so fertile was not only because of the light shield, but also because the original soil was barren. The nutrients needed for the growth of all kinds of plants were lacking, so the machines below had been constantly infusing nutrients into the soil. Improving the soil from underground was much more environmentally friendly than spraying on the surface, and the utilization rate was also much higher. This was also closer to the Robert family's standard of simulation. On the surface, it was closer to nature. However, modification was modification. No matter how realistic it was still modification. Once this modification stopped, everything would return to normal. The people of the Robert family loved to live in their own world. Not long after the group stopped, a flying car flew over from the distance. As it approached, it made a beautiful turn and stopped in the air in front of the group, slowly descending. A person walked out of the car. He looked very robust and had a warm smile on his face. After glancing at the people standing on a grassland, he walked straight towards Falvey. "Mr. Falvey, I'm really sorry to have kept you waiting for so long. The boss had some matters to attend to, so he couldn't make time to come over. I hope you don't mind," the man said loudly as he walked in front of Falvey and performed a noble's greeting. "My name is Carl. The boss sent me to pick you up." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Carl. We didn't wait long." Falvey didn't show much expression on his face. Of course, it wasn't that he was angry. Falvey didn't have much of an expression to begin with. Carl was still smiling. After giving Falvey a simple explanation, he said, "Please follow me." Following Carl's voice, a flying car descended from the sky. Carl made a please gesture, but he didn't seem to have any intention of entering with them. There was an operator inside the flying car. After the two groups had boarded, the flying car took off. Carl jumped into the flying car and followed. The flying car brought them to a place that looked like a village. There were no tall buildings here, and it didn't have the bustling atmosphere of other planets. It was more like an isolated world. Everyone looked at the scene in front of them and was a little surprised. The men were carrying bags of grain into the warehouse. The women were chatting and laughing. Some were hanging clothes next to the pomegranate trees. The children were playing games in groups of 3 to 5. The little ones were running around with some mud on their bodies. These are all. Carrie was a little doubtful. They are all robots, Yudi said. They're all robots. Tang Kukikia looked at everyone on both sides of the street curiously. These people were different from the robots she had seen before. This was too real. Wah! A child cried. A few children accidentally kicked another child when they were playing games. As a result, the child who was kicked didn't get the card he wanted. The sound of crying was really frightening, especially the tears that flowed from the eyes of the child, which made his face, which was originally covered in dirt, even more messy. Is this really a robot? Carrie asked again. Yudi and Beaver didn't say anything. Because of the child's crying, a man walked out of the house and carried the child. He wiped the tears on the child's face and smiled. He took out a card and handed it to the child. Only then did the child, whose face was red from crying, stop crying and smile. Yudi and the others continued to stay silent. Even Shotten didn't make wild guesses now. Otherwise, he would lose face if he said something wrong. Carl, who was leading the way, only smiled when he saw this scene and continued to lead the way. When they walked past the chair that the child had been sitting on, Sillin casually reached out and wiped a drop of the child's tear on the chair's handle. What's wrong? What did you find? Carrie came over and saw the liquid on Sillin's hand. Is that a tear? Hui Mao, who was originally lying on Sillin's shoulder, also became alert and stretched his neck over. Seeing this, Sillin directly wiped some of the liquid on his finger on Hui Mao's beard. Hui Mao shook his head in disgust. Water. Yes, water. That's all, Sillin said. Carrie didn't know how to react. What do you mean? Tico, who was wearing a white coat, came forward and explained. If this is just water, then that child really is a robot. Human tears aren't just water. According to the types, there are basic, reflexive, emotional, and so on. For example, if you have dust in your eyes, you will cry, and the liquid in your eyes will clean the dust out. Another example is when you are sad or touched. They're all different, and the composition of the tear is different. Whether it's sodium, potassium, manganese, or other metals or enzymes, the composition of the tear will be different under different circumstances. This was the complexity of humans, unlike robots. Even if they behaved like robots, what they shed was just water. They wouldn't be as complicated as human tears. So that's how it is. Carrie nodded in understanding. Even so, the robots of the Robert family are really amazing. Yudi sighed. It was too real. The feeling of touch and the protruding veins on the arm of the man who was holding the child just now all felt real. But these were all robots, the Robert family's robot kingdom. As long as there was a need, every one of them could instantly change their state and become a fighting tool that was no less dangerous than the 3rd and 6th teams. This was just Robert Fritz's robot kingdom. What about the other Robert family members' territories? They were all similar to this. If these robots were to be sold to the public, the price would be in the 8 digits, Beaver said. He knew the price of the special robots of the Robert family. Let's see if we can buy an arm if we sell me, Carrie muttered. Lamenting the Robert family's robot kingdom, everyone followed Carl to a building that looked like an ancient castle. After entering, there were a few people wearing ancient knight uniforms standing on both sides of the aisle. When they saw Carl, they gave him an ancient salute. Inside the castle, there were a few people wearing knight uniforms. They were essentially robots. The robots in different positions were playing different roles. It was like a movie directed by Robert Fritz, and the people who came were all the characters in the movie. Those 2 robots are talking bad about us. After walking away, Hui Mao said angrily in Sillin's ear. Only Sillin heard it. What did they say? Sillin raised his hand and scratched Hui Mao's chin. These robots didn't communicate with each other through words. Instead, they communicated through electromagnetic waves that were hard to detect for most people with A-rank genes. So, although the 2 people wearing knight uniforms still had a serious expression on their faces and their mouths were shut tight, in reality, The two of them had been communicating with each other for a long time. Wheeze narrowed its eyes from the scratches. They said that every single one of us was stupid, ugly, and that we actually brought animals with us. They said that Snowball was as fat as a ball, and that my fur color was ugly. Meow meow. They really don't know how to appreciate it. Wee Mouse snorted. Don't bother with them. You are a few levels higher than them. Of course. Didn't you see that I pretended not to hear their conversation? That's called ignoring them, right? Wee Mouse said proudly. Yes, yes. You did well today, Cylin said. A cat should be stroked gently, or it would explode. Carl brought them to a hall. There was some delicately prepared food in the hall, and there were beautiful maids standing beside them. If they didn't know that 99% of the people here were robots, they would have been tempted. But now, they could only focus their attention on the food. Of course, it was necessary to be vigilant. The two captains didn't bring them here to be gluttons or decorations. Carl said that Frenz was still busy, so he let them eat first. They didn't hold back at all. No matter what, the Robert family definitely didn't lack money. After eating, Carl asked Falvey and Schotten to enter the study. The others waited outside. After dinner, snacks and tea were served. At least this way, they wouldn't appear to be neglectful. Carrie despised this kind of face-saving project very much. However, despising was one thing. Eating was another. That was why he didn't take much of the snacks and tea that were sent to him after the meal. Cylin sat on a chair and drank his tea leisurely. Meanwhile, the gray cat was lying on Cylin's shoulder and listening to the robot's gossip with its ears perked up. In reality, other than people like Frenz who already knew the code to convert electromagnetic waves into signals, no one else would be able to decipher the electromagnetic waves even if they received them with instruments. Not even Cylin knew what they meant. Wheeze's victory lay in its half-machine advantage, which was why it could understand the conversation. Listening to the gossip of the robots in the castle, Hui Mao tried to keep a straight face, but his trembling beard still let Cylin know that he was holding it in. Don't hold it in. If you want to laugh, laugh. As long as it's not too exaggerated, no one will know that you're laughing at what the robots are saying, Cylin said. Hui Mao grinned. He was about to tell Cylin about the funny story he just heard, but his body suddenly froze. What's wrong? Cylin noticed Hui Mao's abnormality. Hui Mao thought for a moment and said, Something's wrong. After a while, Hui Mao tried to maintain a normal expression on his cat face, but the words he said to Cylin caused Cylin's body to tense up. I just received an electromagnetic wave. It's very familiar, and it left a deep impression. I received this electromagnetic wave in the warehouse not long ago when we went to the Level 3 prison planet at Sector S. Azrael. This was Cylin's first reaction. He couldn't think of anyone else other than Azrael. After all, the defense system of that Level 3 prison planet, be it on the ground or in outer space, had all collapsed. With such technology, one couldn't blame Cylin for being nervous. After all, the fate of that Level 3 prison planet was just too tragic. Keep listening, Cylin said to Hui Mao. Amen, I know. Hui Mao was no longer giggling now. Because he had been controlling his expression all this time, no one could see anything wrong with him now. He made a vague gesture, and Yudi, Dias, and the others felt a chill in their hearts. Although they didn't know what was going on, the meaning behind Cylin's gesture was too important. High alert. Why did he tell everyone to be on high alert? Tico saw Lycrabe's gesture and then looked at the little rabbit whose ears were twitching inside his clothes. She sucked in a deep breath. We're in trouble, big trouble. Otherwise, Whitey's ears wouldn't be twitching like this. Tico had always known that the little rabbit had an ability to sense danger, and after living with it for so many years, she understood what the twitching of its ears meant. The people of the 3rd B Squadron also saw Cylin's vague message. He looked like he was joking like before, but they were extremely prepared. They were all people who had experienced many things, so naturally they had their own ways of dealing with situations like this. There were robot maids standing around them, so they couldn't make it too obvious. Chiefing ate the food on his plate in big mouthfuls. His pointy ears were perked up, and his tail was no longer wagging as he paid attention to the situation around him. Cylin stood up. Everyone around him looked at him and smiled at everyone. I just received news about the T-13 mine, and he told me to inform the commander and Commander Falvey. I think they'll be able to increase our price a little. No one believed Silen's words, but some of them could tell that the matter this time was related to the two commanders inside. The two commanders were in danger. I'll go with you, Carrie said. It wasn't just Carrie. The lieutenant commanders of both squads here had expressed the intention to go with them, but Silen refused. No need, I'll go inform them. You guys just wait here. There are so many people here after all. What he meant was that if something happened, you guys would have to lead the team members here. If everyone went, it would be troublesome, and it would be easier for him to act alone. Hearing Silen's words, the others did not insist. Udos was a little nervous, but fortunately his head was lowered so that no one could see his nervousness. Beaver patted his shoulder and motioned for him to calm down. He looked up and smiled at Beaver. I'm fine, I just choked. After taking a few deep breaths, Udos had calmed down a lot. Silen walked towards Frenz's study, and the maid showed no intention of stopping him. This puzzled Silen greatly. That shouldn't be the case. Chapter 186. Just now, Huimao had received an electromagnetic wave transmission that indicated that these robots were planning to rebel. However, what puzzled Silen was why they didn't rebel earlier or later, but instead waited for them to arrive. Also, was it Azrael's people who caused the robots to rebel? Although he couldn't be sure, Silen still had to be cautious when it came to matters involving Azrael. Otherwise, he would regret it if they were all wiped out. A person dressed in a servant's uniform came over and led Silen to Frenz's study. Silen didn't deliberately look at the servant who led the way. This servant was also a robot, and he was also one of the rebels. From the looks of it, this servant was still playing the role that Frenz had given him. He was polite and had a smile on his face, looking very friendly. If Huimao hadn't received the electromagnetic wave from this servant, Silen wouldn't have guessed the robot's next goal. Standing at the door of Frenz's study, the servant pressed the notification bell. A light screen popped up on the door, showing the face of a middle-aged man. What's wrong? The middle-aged man asked. From his voice, it was obvious that he was dissatisfied with the interruption just now. This man was Robert Frenz. Master, this gentleman said he has something to tell those two about the T-13 mine, the servant replied respectfully. At this time, Falvey and Schotten, who were sitting inside, felt their hearts skip a beat. Frenz didn't set it to private mode, so Schotten and Falvey could clearly hear the conversation between the master and servant. They could also see Silen standing behind the servant outside. Because of this, they also knew that Silen wouldn't say something like that for no reason. Silen didn't know the details of the T-13 mine contract, so something must have happened. Although they both had their own thoughts, Falvey and Schotten didn't show it on their faces. Falvey took the initiative to cover up the lie with Silen. Frenz's expression softened a little, and he nodded. Since it's about the T-13 mine, let's talk inside. Following Frenz's voice, the door to the study opened, and Silen walked in. Schotten noticed that Silen's fingers that seemed to be hanging casually at the side of his body had vibrated very slightly. It was a very short period of time, less than 5 seconds. Within these 5 seconds, Silen had walked through the door, greeted Frenz, and performed a simple bow. But for Schotten and Falvey, the impact of these 5 seconds was too great. The code transmitted by Silen's fingers was high alert. The robots are rebelling. They want to kill Frunza. Frenz looked at Silen and was about to speak when suddenly, more than 10 gun barrels jumped out from Carl's arm and shot at Silen, Falvey, and Schotten. The servant who came in took out a high-energy lightsaber and a disc-shaped device in his other hand. He rushed to where Frenz was sitting. There was a transparent energy shield there, and the servant threw the disc-shaped device at the energy shield. The disc sucked on the energy shield, causing it to become weaker and weaker. Frenz, who was inside, obviously couldn't react to the current situation. He really couldn't understand why the robots would react this way. It wasn't until the energy shield dissipated and the servant rushed over with a lightsaber that Frenz thought of dodging. Silen kicked the servant away and chopped off the servant's wrist with the wrist knife in his hand. There was no blood at the cut area, but some fused fibers and transmission lines. The wrist knife in Silen's hand was obtained from the stronghold. It was better than the wrist knife that had been destroyed like tofu, and he could still cut down the robot with ease. The robot didn't feel any pain when its wrist was chopped off, and its movements wouldn't slow down because of the wrist. Dodging the servant's sudden kick, Hao-Ren ducked to avoid the attack of the lightsaber, and at the same time, he slashed the servant's neck with the wrist knife. Chi! Although it wasn't completely cut off, it was almost there. Some of the lines were cut off, and the lightsaber in the servant's hand disappeared. However, Sillin didn't relax because of this. Sensing that something was wrong, he turned his head reflexively. Two beams of light brushed past the ends of Sillin's hair, which emitted a burning smell. The two high-density energy beams came from the servant's eyes. His neck was almost cut off, but he was still able to fight back like this. Sillin had no choice but to continue smashing. Yes, smash. He punched the servant's face again and again. When he fought with the servant just now, he knew that the robot's exterior was made of hard materials, so he could smash it with his bare hands. Only when the servant's entire head was smashed into a pancake did he put down his kicking leg and stop moving. Only then did he really die. Facing Carl's attack, the three people who were already prepared dodged in time and opened their energy shields. Before coming in, their guns were all placed in the storage box in front of the door, and they only had wrist knives and some small knives on them. But this was enough. If they could open their energy shields, they could get close to Carl and find an opportunity to kill him. While Sillin was fighting the servant, the two captain-level characters were fighting Carl at the same time, forcing him to keep retreating. In the end, Carl seemed to see the situation clearly and retreated. While there was movement on Sillin's side, the battle in the hall had also begun. The entire hall was a mess because of the battle between the two sides. That luxurious dining table had already been destroyed beyond recognition and turned into scraps. Chiefing had long since lost that naive look from before. Right now, his entire body was filled with a brutal aura. The long claws at the tip of his fingers directly penetrated a maid's heart and then forcibly ripped it open. Watching the maid whose body had been split in half lying on the ground, Chiefing clawed at the maid's head again. Someone had been injured by the beams of light from these robots' eyes just now, and he didn't know if they were dead or not. Therefore, Chiefing was very cautious. He would completely destroy any threatening parts, and if one claw didn't work, he would follow up with a few more. Not far away, the people of Earth 3B Squadron who saw Chiefing's actions felt their eyelids twitch. This is too fucking brutal. Although Tang Xiuqiu didn't have Chiefing's brutal abilities, his marksmanship was excellent, and he was shooting almost non-stop. There was no so-called aiming time at all, and it was all based on touch and instinct. The modified bullets entered those robots' eyes and then exploded. Therefore, every shot Tang Xiuqiu fired was a true headshot. A headless robot would also have a certain degree of offensive ability, but it was indiscriminate. Not only did it attack the people of Team 3 and 6 team, it also attacked the other robots. This also lessened the burden on the others. There was also a white shadow scuttling around, and wherever the white shadow passed, there would always be robots sent flying, crashing into the ceiling or the surrounding walls. The walls didn't have any dents, but the robots were on the verge of falling apart, and those that didn't were also slow. Meanwhile, the starships outside the planet had also left the spaceport, avoiding the possible threat here. Before Sillin went to Fritz's study, he had already sent a message to the starships outside the planet. Of course, it was encrypted. Outsiders would see one message, but after the people in the team decrypted it, it would become another message. Sillin told them to pay close attention to the movements here, and to leave the spaceport once they found any abnormalities, and not to get involved with matters related to this planet. Reinforcements had to be arranged carefully, and they couldn't be killed in the air before they could come to the rescue. In the study, after getting rid of the servant and forcing Azrael away, Sillin briefly explained the development of the matter to Fritz. After all, it was a robot under Fritz's command that had betrayed them, and whether or not it was because of Azrael was still undetermined. Fritz looked at Sillin with a complicated expression, silently walked to the wall behind the chair, and pressed his palm on it. Where Fritz's palm touched, a flat surface that looked like an electronic board appeared. Fritz pressed a few numbers, but those numbers were definitely not passwords. Otherwise, he wouldn't have entered them in front of Cylin and the others. After entering, compared to a picture and some data from Jean Kai, Frantz was stunned. Third generation, what? Falvey asked. He was very unhappy that a deal had turned out like this. His team members were still fighting the robots outside, and he didn't know what the situation was like. Frantz sighed. All the third-generation robots have betrayed us. Third-generation robots? Cylin and the others didn't know what Frantz meant by third-generation robots. Looking at the picture on the wall, a group of light dots surrounded the center. The one in the middle should be the castle, and those light dots were the third-generation robots that Frantz had mentioned. Frantz operated on the light wall for a while, then turned to look at Falvey. Have the people you brought here all entered the castle? Everyone is here except the people on the space plane. That's good. The castle will be sealed. The traitors have surrounded us. Falvey turned around and walked outside without saying a word. Since the castle was sealed, then the traitors inside the castle must be eliminated. The knights and servants inside the castle had already rebelled, and the original guard roles had been changed. The bloodstains on the ground belonged to the 3rd Squad and the 6th Squad. These robots didn't have blood. Therefore, Falvey and Schotten felt their hearts heavy when they saw the bloodstains on the ground. Regardless of whether their lives were in danger or not, a lot of blood had been lost. Perhaps Frantz had activated the castle's defense system, but the rebellious robots were attacked from all directions. They had nowhere to hide inside the castle, and of course they wouldn't hide. Very soon, the rebellious robots were cleaned up, and the medics were treating the wounded. 2 3rd B squadron members were dead, and many were heavily injured. Fortunately, there were a lot of good medicine and medical equipment inside the castle, so the heavily injured were treated in time. But right now, both Schotten and Falvey were in a pretty bad mood. They were trapped inside the castle, and they had no idea how the space plane was doing. They couldn't get in touch with it at all, and their communicators couldn't receive any signal at all. Therefore, Falvey went to Frantz and used his communicator to contact the people on the space plane. Fortunately, the space plane didn't seem to be under attack. Right now, the people inside were still wondering why they had suddenly lost contact. Before this, Cylin had only told them to be on high alert, but he didn't tell them to leave the castle in case they needed the space plane urgently. But right now, they really didn't need it. Therefore, Falvey and Schotten ordered the people inside the space plane to leave the planet and rendezvous with the starship. They would contact each other when the time came. Although Falvey and Schotten really wanted to leave this place on the space plane would definitely be shot down before it could even get close to the castle. Third-generation robots didn't just travel on the road. Before the arrival of the 3rd and 6th Division, Frantz was the only one in the castle. The other members of the Robert family, Frantz's wife, and children were all on the other side of the planet. This was equivalent to Frantz's place of work. After the incident here, Frantz contacted the people on the other side of the planet and activated the highest level of defense. There weren't many third-generation robots on the other side. 80% of the Robert family on the planet were there, and with another layer of protection, Frantz wasn't worried about the situation there. "Hey, send a signal," Frantz, who was lying on the chair, said softly. A signal was sent from the castle and covered the entire planet. All the 4th-generation and 5th-generation robots that received this signal began to change. Their previous roles were no longer needed. The people in the villages and towns that Cylin and the others had seen, regardless of whether they were men or women, old or young, immediately changed their status. After a while, Frantz finally left his study and came to the hall. After all, as the host, he had to explain something to the guests. He drew on the wall with his finger, and the wall turned into an electronic screen, showing the situation outside. The 3rd-generation robots have all been infected with the virus. Now, I've named this Virus Rebellion. All robots infected with this virus will no longer be controlled by the original core program and will instead execute the program of the virus, which is what you've just encountered. But the strange thing is that the 4th-generation and 5th-generation robots are all normal. This virus can obviously infect the 4th-generation and 5th-generation robots, but in reality, it's not like that. In other words, this behavior has a purpose. Azrael, Shotton asked. Frentz nodded. It should be. The Robert family wouldn't do such a thing. Sillin also said that he received an electromagnetic wave signal from Azrael. He didn't ask why Sillin was sure that he received the electromagnetic wave signal from Azrael, nor did he ask why Sillin knew that the robots would rebel. Frentz didn't have time to worry about these things now. Looking at the image displayed on the wall, Falvey frowned and said, if the 4th generation and 5th generation robots you're talking about are the civilian-looking robots we've seen, even though they have the advantage in numbers, it seems that they can't completely withstand the 3rd generation robots. After a pause, Falvey said, since there are 3rd generation and 4th generation robots, then are there 1st and 2nd generation robots? Frentz didn't answer this question. He just looked at the image displayed on the screen. Outside the castle, the 4th generation and 5th generation robots were fighting against the 3rd generation robots. Whether it was in terms of material or equipment, they weren't as good as the 3rd generation robots. However, their suicidal attacks were a huge obstacle to the 3rd generation robots. In the image, a child with only half a body left grabbed a 3rd generation robot and self-destructed. Such a close-range explosion was indeed a great threat to the 3rd generation robots. However, looking at the scene of the explosion, everyone felt a strange sense of depression in their hearts. Even though they knew that it wasn't a human, they couldn't help but feel that it was unavoidable. Many people looked at the image on the wall, but Sillin only looked at it for a moment and then stopped paying attention. Although his eyes were still on the screen, his thoughts were no longer on it. The robots gossiping earlier was actually to figure out if these people could understand the meaning of their communication. Whis didn't act like it understood what they were saying, so everything happened very quickly. But right now Sillin was puzzled as to why the robots chose this time to talk to him. In other words, why would Azrael choose this time to make the 3rd generation robots betray him? Frentz definitely didn't know about this. Sillin could see that he wasn't lying. So, what was Azrael's purpose this time? He definitely didn't want to kill Frentz. Otherwise, the robots wouldn't have stopped Sillin from going to the study. The reason was because they didn't really want Frentz to die. After thinking about it, Sillin speculated that Azrael's purpose was still on Frentz. However, he didn't know how exactly Frentz would react. The 4th generation and 5th generation robots became fewer and fewer. In the end, many 4th and 5th generation robots were destroyed by the powerful firepower before they could even get close to the 3rd generation robots. The guns on the 4th generation and 5th generation robots could only make a small hole or dent in the 3rd generation robots' bodies. Anyone with a discerning eye could see the difference, and they also expected this result. What should we do? Falvey looked at the screen and said. This question was asked by Frentz, and no one else said anything. Carey rubbed his shoulder cannon, and Chiefing was playing with his fingers. He probably hadn't killed enough. Shueqio was very quiet, sleeping next to Tang Qiuqiu. However, if one looked into its eyes, they would know that this white fatty had been playing very happily. More and more 3rd generation robots had gathered around the castle. The 3rd and 6th team didn't have the patience to calm down. They didn't know how long the castle could last, and they were prepared for the robots outside to break in. Frentz rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, activate the 2nd generation activation wave signal. 2nd generation activation? 2nd generation robots? What did the 2nd generation robots look like? The screen showed an image of another part of the planet. It was a mountainous area with many tall mountains. However, gradually everyone was shocked. One of the mountains began to change, breaking down into small pieces, and each piece turned into a human shape. That was the 2nd generation robot. It was as big as a mountain, and the broken pieces were densely packed on the ground. It was much smaller than the 3rd generation robot, but it was still the 2nd generation robot, so it should be more powerful. It should have no problem taking down the 3rd generation robot. However, it didn't take long for Frentz to scream. Impossible. Looking at the image on the screen, Hui Mao, who was lying on Sillin's shoulder, shook his beard. I think we fell into a trap. Chapter 187. The image on the screen sent chills down everyone's spines. The 2nd generation robots that had just been awakened from the decomposition of a mountain had all stiffened up before the third-generation robot's betrayal could be resolved. The so-called stiffening meant that the robots were frozen in place, and the only things that flashed through their eyes were some fluorescent red things. The fluorescent red things were caused by the virus invasion, and the flashing red things in the robots' eyes were a sign that their programs were being modified. Fritz's control was growing weaker and weaker, and although Fritz tried his best to salvage the situation, he still couldn't stop the virus from invading. The invasion of these rebellious programs was tyrannical. Some of the second-generation robots' tools and control programs couldn't be completely changed, and some of the encrypted microsystems couldn't be completely infiltrated either. Compared to the third-generation robots, the rebellious virus obviously took longer to infect the second-generation robots, and some of the programs that couldn't be changed were forcibly erased. Therefore, when the second-generation robots' stiffening was over, their movements didn't look as smooth as before. It looks like the virus didn't completely infect the second-generation robots, Schotten said. Falvey and the others let out a small sigh of relief. At least they could handle the third-generation robots for a while, but the second generation was troublesome. 5 third-generation robots might not even be able to handle one second-generation robot. No, it's not over yet. Fritz's finger swiftly tapped on the hologram. Udi, Beaver, and the others were slowly noticing something. They're improving it, Udi said. Fritz didn't answer. It was obvious that he agreed with Udi's words. Does this mean that someone on this planet is improving these virus programs? Falvey asked. A member of the 3rd B Squadron nodded. It should be. Otherwise, these rebellious viruses wouldn't have invaded with such purpose and improved so quickly. The person who spread the virus, Azrael, was on this planet. The third-generation robot's movements were gradually becoming smoother, which meant that the virus had spread to a wider area. The more unified the robot's command program was, the faster its movements were. Therefore, for Fritz and the other party behind the scenes, when there were 2 different commands, the robot's reaction would definitely be slower. However, as Fritz's control over the third-generation robot weakened, the third-generation robot's movements became smoother and smoother. The situation was not optimistic. If it was only the third generation, they could just rush out and fight. However, with the addition of the second generation, rushing out rashly would definitely be courting death. When Silen saw that Fritz didn't even bother to wipe the sweat off his forehead, his hands didn't stop moving, and he didn't even dare to slow down his speed, he said, "If you can't do it alone, then send a couple of people to do it. We do have some technicians in our B squadrons who know about this." Schotten and Falvey looked at each other and then at Fritz, who did not say anything. They frowned and shook their heads. The Robert family's robots had their own special control methods and special coding programs that could not be leaked to the outside world. For example, Fritz was typing the program right in front of them, but not a single person could understand it. It was because Fritz was typing some special symbols, and every symbol represented a different meaning. Moreover, as a famous robot family in the League of Stars, the Robert family had their own special programming language. Unlike the common programming language used in the League of Stars, only members of the Robert family could understand this programming language. Other than that, they also had their own proprietary formulas and commands. If the technicians of the 2 squadrons joined the fray, then Fritz would have to reveal these things to them. Otherwise, there was no way the technicians of the 2 squadrons could do it. Bang! Fritz hammered the wall with all his strength. The complex data and symbols displayed on the holographic screen were incomprehensible. Even though they did not understand what these symbols represented, they could see the smooth movements of the second-generation robots and the speed of the third-generation robots. Fritz's clenched fists smashing into the wall told them that the virus had completely infiltrated the second-generation robots. But what they didn't know was that the reason Fritz was so angry wasn't because the second-generation robots had all been invaded by the virus. It was because he had found a way to invade the second and third-generation robots so quickly. A gap that had always been overlooked. The reason the Robert family's robots could be so close to humans and possess the supercomputing power and strength of robots was because of the liquid brain. The liquid brain core was different from other machines that had a solid core chip. The chips in the brains of robots were liquid and wrapped in a brain core. Compared to solid chips, they could be more flexible, had a stronger ability to upgrade, and were much more compatible than the former. This time, the rebel virus worked on the nanowires on the outer shell of the brain. It couldn't invade the brain, but after acting on the nanowires, it cut off the line between the liquid core inside the brain and the external execution circuit, allowing the external execution circuit to transmit the command spread by the virus. Now, the robots that were invaded by the virus, whether it was the third generation or the second generation, didn't have the supercomputing function and divergent branching program. They were just weapons, and the hit rate was significantly lower than before. This was good news. But for Fritz, this was undoubtedly a fiery slap in the face. The nanowires and other microfibers attached to the outside of the brain were directly cut off. Although they had thought about this before, many people in the family thought it was impossible. After all, the microfibers and nanowires must all be cut off in order to block the connection between the brain and the external execution circuit. At that time, most people thought it was impossible, so they didn't delve into this aspect. Every time the robots were upgraded, they improved other aspects. However, Fritz wasn't one of those people. Although the robots were later produced according to the family standards, the robots that Fritz was most proud of weren't designed according to the family standards. Fritz had put a lot of effort into the brain. He even added layers of encryption to the terminals of the microfibers and nanowires. Because the project was too difficult, he only used this method once. The robots that came after that were similar to the common robots in the family, which were the second, third, and fourth generation robots. As for the first generation, they were the ones that Fritz put the most effort into. However, Fritz wasn't willing to use them. If he used them, this city would be ruined, and all these years of operation would be wasted. While thinking about this, Fritz slammed his fists against the wall again. Serene felt that the people of the Robert family had a kind of obsession. It was as if they knew it was a lie, but they still forced themselves to believe it. They had the capital to be arrogant, but if they were too arrogant and overconfident, they would neglect many things. Forget it. Serene was too lazy to talk about other people's business. Flicking Huimao's ear, Serene asked, "How is it?" Huimao gave him a confident look. Serene smiled slightly. In terms of machinery, there were many more people in the League of Stars who were better than the Robert family. It was just that the halo of the Robert family was too dazzling, and it overshadowed the shining points of others. The unfamiliar symbols of Fritz had already been deciphered by Huimao, and he had also learned some information about the brain nucleus. The two teams in Hall were a little anxious as more and more robots gathered outside. They kept hearing the sounds of explosions outside, which meant that the robots outside were firing at them. Right now, it was only the third-generation robots. When the second-generation robots arrived, they didn't know if this ancient castle would be able to withstand them. Falvey was very angry. Their contract didn't say that they had to protect the buyer. However, the problem was that their current transaction hadn't been completed. Although the price had been negotiated and the goods had been inspected, they hadn't received the money yet. It seemed that Fritz wouldn't give them the money for the time being. This was a disaster that they had been implicated in. Since the goods had already been handed over, they had to hand over the money and the goods, and Fritz didn't seem to want their help. Hence, Falvey directly explained to Fritz that this was Fritz's own matter, and that the two teams were purely implicated. They would leave after getting the money, and they could do whatever they wanted. Falvey and Schotten weren't stupid. They knew that Fritz definitely had his own trump card. Since he had a trump card, why would he want the two teams to pay with their lives for the robots here? Although it would be difficult to rush out, it would be even more difficult if they waited for the second-generation robots to arrive. It would be better to leave now and fly away from the planet. However, what surprised Falvey was that Fritz hoped that they could stay and was willing to pay double the price of the T-13 mine. However, no matter how much money it was, they had to be alive to spend it. When they had come here, due to some of the rules that Fritz had set, they had only brought some simple weapons. It would be very difficult to fight against those inhuman beings. Just by looking at the ratio of numbers, they knew that they were at a complete disadvantage. 2 hours. Just 2 hours. In 2 hours, I will work with the other side of the planet to find a way to kill the virus. If we still can't find it by then, I will activate the first generation to fight. And then the first generation will follow in the footsteps of the second generation. Falvey said with some mockery. No, the first generation is different from the other generations. It is my proudest work. It won't be infected by the virus, Frantz said with certainty. Falvey looked at Schotten. Schotten was a little suspicious. Were the Robert family people so blindly confident? The defense of the castle is now completely capable of resisting the attacks of the second and third generation robots. It might not be able to last forever, but it should be able to last for 2 hours. Schotten and Falvey felt that these words had some credibility. The outer layer of the castle was protected by an energy shield, and the walls of the castle, whether it was the outer layer or the inner hall, were rather sturdy. Even Carl couldn't break through. To be honest, in terms of safety, both Schotten and Falvey knew that it was a good opportunity to leave now. If they stayed, things might very well get out of control. On the other hand, if they rejected Frantz now, it might not take long for the news that the Vanguard was afraid of Azrael and the Robert family's robots to spread. F***, what the hell? After discussing with Schotten, Falvey accepted Frantz's proposal. At the same time, they signed a new contract. After that, both sides felt much more at ease. Frantz returned to his study to work. Schotten and Falvey also stayed in Frantz's study. What if this guy changed his mind and ran away? Frantz didn't reject Schotten and Falvey's request to stay in the study. He believed that with Schotten and Falvey's intellect and level of education, they wouldn't be able to understand the Robert family's exclusive programming language. If Falvey and Schotten heard Frantz's evaluation of them in his mind, they might just pull out their guns and shoot him. In the hall, both teams stayed there. Some of them wandered around the castle. Since there were no robots to restrain them, and Frantz didn't say that they weren't allowed to wander around, those who had nothing better to do would also wander around. It was rare to see such a castle-like building. F***, the doors are all closed. I thought I'd see something special, Carrie said after walking around. We can't help it. This is the Robert family's territory. Although it's a castle-like building, it's still the work of the Mech family. Otherwise, why would Frantz let us stay here? Udi sneered. And don't forget those gun barrels that popped out from all over the walls that killed the robots in the ancient castle. This ancient castle is Fritz's eyes, Beaver added. Chiefeng and Tang Xiuqiu weren't in the mood to talk about this. Xiuqiu pulled Tang Xiuqiu over and told her about their great achievements. Chiefeng, on the other hand, was playing with his claws. Yudos curiously moved closer to have a look. How did those claws tear the robots in half? Hey, Sillin, what are you thinking about? Carrie elbowed Sillin. Sillin and Hui Mao had been silent since the beginning. Hui Mao was lying on Sillin's shoulder with his eyes closed. It looked like he was asleep, but Sillin knew that he was processing the new electromagnetic waves and the signals transmitted by Frantz. The entire castle revealed a lot of information. Others might not know anything, but for Hui Mao, who had cracked the Robert family's exclusive programming language, the amount of information was huge. As for Sillin, his understanding of the machine language wasn't as good as Hui Mao, so he didn't dwell on this problem. Instead, he was analyzing something else. Hearing Carrie's question, Sillin raised his head and looked at Carrie and the others. Did you notice that the buildings in the villages and towns we passed before, whether they were tall or short, luxurious or plain, although some of them were destroyed, most of them were still intact? Even during the battle between the 4th and 5th generation robots and the 2nd generation robots, those buildings were still intact. They were almost the same as the castle we were staying in now. Sillin's words caused Carrie to recall for a moment. He stared at the display screen on the wall of the hall and noticed that it was showing images of several places from different angles. Most of them were the areas around the ancient castle, but there were some buildings that weren't damaged at all. The 3rd generation robots had been smashing their way through the buildings, but that was all they could see. Indeed, how long will it take for the 2nd generation to arrive here? Sillin asked Beaver. Beaver and Udi took out some small instruments and calculated. The fastest part will arrive in 10 minutes. Beaver pointed at the flying robot birds on the panel. These are the fastest ones. The others won't take long. After the vanguard arrives, they will arrive one after another. Scylla nodded. What else do you know? Beaver's face was bitter. It's blocked. This castle has blocked all external signals from the outside and inside. Only Frunze's own signal can enter and receive it, Yudi said as he pushed the Miantuan's tail away from his arm. Scylla grunted and closed his eyes, leaning back in his chair without saying a word. Hey, you brat, don't tell me you're going to sleep in this situation. Carrie cried out. Scylla didn't open his eyes. There's nothing I can do even with my eyes open. I might as well take a good rest. Who knows? There might be a tough battle later. Carrie opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. He continued to look at Yudi and Beaver statistics. Scylla closed his eyes. The signals around him appeared in his mind. He could even recognize the unfamiliar symbols, but he didn't know what they meant. He would probably need Huimao to translate when the time came. 10 minutes later, the second generation's first batch of robots arrived. It was obvious that the castle had suffered an even fiercer attack. Although the castle wasn't damaged, the vibrations caused by the energy shield affected the castle. Everyone in the hall was nervous because of the vibrations. They were afraid that the energy shield would collapse in the next moment. However, the good thing was that the energy shield lasted for 2 hours. Although it was showing signs of collapsing, it still made it through. The bad news was that Frunze and the other Robert family members on this planet didn't find a way to deal with the virus. The virus program was too tricky. The more Frunze learned about it, the more he knew how complicated and domineering it was. If all the robots self-destructed at the same time, the planet would really be destroyed. Frunze's decades of hard work would go down the drain. 2 hours later, the look in Frunze's eyes dimmed. According to what he said before, that was the only way. Frunze stood up from his chair and walked to the wall not far from the desk. Just like before, he raised his hand and placed it on the wall. A light screen and control panel appeared on the wall. He entered the symbols, scanned his identity, and verified his genes. After a series of tests, Frunze said, "First generation, activate." The first generation was the robot that Frunze had spent the most effort on. Unlike the second generation robots that were placed in the mountains, they had always been with Frunze and the other Robert family members on this planet. Chapter 188. The first generation robots were the first batch of robots that Frunze had created when he established his kingdom. Perhaps there were some new technologies that Frunze hadn't used, but in terms of complexity and superiority of materials, they were much better than the later generations. Previously, the third team and the sixth team didn't know where the so-called first generation was. The fourth and fifth generation were like commoners, living in this artificial city that Frunze had constructed. The third generation was like a guard stationed in this city. The second generation was like a recluse and would only be awakened at certain critical times. What about the first generation? Everyone looked at the scene displayed on the wall. Apart from Scylla, Yudi, and the others who had just discussed this matter and were prepared, everyone else had a look of astonishment on their faces. In this city, no, it wasn't just this city. There were many places on this planet where the Robert family existed. In the towns and cities that were built, every building that hadn't suffered any damage from the rebellion of the third and second generation robots was a first generation robot. Although this ancient castle hadn't changed much, everyone had already begun to guess whether this ancient castle was also a first generation robot. Were they currently in the stomach of a first generation robot? In reality, the first generation robots weren't like the other generations that had humanoid forms. Their shapes weren't necessarily the same, and their sizes were also different. However, they were very unique. They looked very rough, like ancient machines, and many of them were covered in a layer of sand, like a generation that had been eliminated by the passage of time. However, when the first generation and second generation clashed, it was clear who was superior and who was inferior. Their huge bodies, agile speed, and excellent equipment could be seen. From the energy shields that constantly flashed and the form that constantly changed to adapt to the battlefield, it could be seen how much effort had been put into creating this first-generation robot. Huimao, who was lying on Scylla's shoulder, had the fur on his ears constantly trembling. Outsiders wouldn't notice anything strange. After all, who would stare at a cat's ears all the time? Even if they stared, they wouldn't have any other thoughts just because of the trembling of the cat's ears. Every single hair on Huemao's ears was tracking a wave signal. When Frunze activated the first generation, the wave signal suddenly increased. Not only did it come from the first generation, but there were also some signals coming from the outside. These signals carried information similar to the rebel virus. If the first generation received these signals, the virus would begin to infect the first generation. However, the good thing was that even if the first generation robots received these waves, they didn't have the same reaction as the second generation robots. They were still stubbornly clearing the second and third generation rebels. The shorter ones were 10 meters, and the taller ones were more than 100 meters. Seeing the first generation robots send the third generation robots flying as if they were ants, everyone had to admit that they were a lot calmer and calmer. With these first generation robots, things should be easy, right? Someone said. No, it won't be that easy. Frentz, who had followed Shadun and Falvey to the hall, looked at the people in the hall and said, "The size of the first generation also has its weakness. They're not without blind spots. There are too many third generation and second generation robots out there. Compared to the numbers of those two, the first generation's numbers are only 1% of theirs, maybe even less." What do you mean? Falvey kind of understood what Frunze was going to say next. Previously, they had accepted the conditions to stay here for 2 hours and missed the best time to leave. That was already enough to make Falvey feel conflicted. Falvey didn't regret it. After all, he had a bunch of lives under his command. But now, from Frunze's tone, he wanted them to join in the fight against the robots. The battlefield outside belonged to the robots. Now that the two teams had joined forces, they were going to fight against the robots with their bodies. Were they looking for SH*T? Also, their weapons and equipment were far from the needs of the battlefield. If they had known that there would be a battle of this level, they would definitely have upgraded their equipment by a few levels. They wouldn't have only brought some cold weapons and simple firearms. Frunze gave Falvey a calm look. "Hey, take it out." As soon as Frunze's voice fell, rows of long boxes fell from the ceiling. The boxes opened, revealing the things inside. When he saw what was inside, Beaver's eyes lit up and he almost drooled. Those who knew what was inside had the same expression as Beaver. If it were not for the situation forcing them to hold back, they would have pounced over a long time ago. Being able to see but not be able to touch was as uncomfortable as being scratched by a cat's paw. Half-biological, mechanical weapons. Falvey raised his eyebrows and looked at Frunze, allowing him to continue. When he heard the words half-biological, mechanical, Huemao's body stiffened. But as Beaver explained in a low voice, the vigilance in Huemao's eyes gradually faded, replaced by thick disdain. How could this broken thing be called a biological mechanical? An authentic half-mechanical life form, a rare species in the universe, was here, and this old man still had the nerve to show it off. However, the others didn't know this. Frunze also didn't know that there was an authentic half-mechanical life form here. After all, the Robert family's half-biological mechanical life form was modeled after Huemao's half-mechanical life form. In order to make it more portable, they had changed a lot, and according to different needs, they could make it into different shapes and have different functions. Frunze went on with his speech. He hoped that the third team and the sixth team could go out and share some of the burden with Gen 3. That was because Gen 3's main target was Gen 2, and Gen 3's threat was at the back. Half-biological mechanical weapons were quite expensive, and they weren't common among hunter groups. Only a small number of hunters had them, and most of them weren't the best ones. The military used more humans, which was why many hunters were jealous of the military. According to Frunze, not only would he provide these high-end weapons for the two teams to use, but he would also choose to give some of them to the two teams after this incident. The core unlock code in these weapons hasn't been unlocked yet. I've set it up so that it can only be used for 72 hours. After this incident is over, I will unlock the core unlock code and let them officially change owners. I will also pay you a sum of money, still the same amount. How about it? Frunze looked at Falvey and Schotten. Some of them were already swallowing their saliva, looking at their team leader eagerly. It had to be said that Frunze understood the psychology of hunters very well. He knew what kind of hunter needed in a certain situation. As a hunter from one of the 4 major hunter groups, even if they weren't from a main team, no one would back down, let alone in this kind of situation. Most of the people that Schotten and Falvey brought with them were combatants. Combatants always had the desire to fight, and as Frunze threw out tempting conditions, some of them finally couldn't resist anymore. Go, team leader! We have to avenge our dead teammates. Whether it was for their dead teammates, for their desire to fight, or for the half-biological mechanical weapons provided by Frunze, Falvey remained silent. He was still weighing the pros and cons Schotten discussed with the rest of the team and looked at Sillin. What do you think, Sillin? Sillin thinks for a moment and said, the purpose of Azrael's people should be the robots. They probably won't do anything to us. Mr. Frunze provided the weapons and protective equipment. If it's just to help the first generation, it's fine. However, I still have some questions for Mr. Frunze. Schotten nodded. Mr. Frunze, my teammates want to ask you something. Frunze knew Sillin. If it weren't for Sillin, he would have been killed by the servant. Although the Robert family always thought highly of themselves, Frunze's tone was not bad in front of Sillin. If you have any questions, just ask. Mr. Frunze, what I want to ask is, other than these weapons, should you provide anything else? Anything else? For example? Frunze looked at Sillin in confusion. For example, fighter jets, armored vehicles, or aircrafts. Oh, that. Frunze sat on the chair and unconsciously tapped his finger on the wall. The Robert family is famous for manufacturing robots. As for fighter jets, armored vehicles, or aircrafts, we don't use them often. However, I do have some here. Frunze's finger slid on the wall, and a light screen appeared on the wall. After clicking on it, some images appeared. That's all I have here. The others are further away from here, on the other side of the planet. In the picture, there were small fighter jets with a strange shape. They were flat, and the armored vehicles were still all right. As for the aircrafts, the big ones were too big, and the small ones were too small. However, if they were to use the small aircrafts and move in batches, they would still make do. It was better than nothing. How could human strength compare to those tireless machines? With these things, it was obvious that the people in the team were more inclined towards Fritz's suggestion. Falvey couldn't reject the hot, expectant gazes of the others, and the main reason was that he was also inclined towards this deal. In fact, Falvey and Schotten both knew that this was a win-win deal. This was a win-win deal. The two teams needed new weapons, and Fritz needed people to test them on the real battlefield. After signing the contract, everyone rushed over to take one out and started fiddling with it. This thing is known as a luxury item worth tens of millions. Carey carefully rubbed the arm cover in his hand. Although these could be sold for tens of millions in some places, it was much cheaper in terms of cost. So, Frunze didn't feel bad about giving them away. To people like him, the most important thing was the improvement of technology, not the obsession with money. Sillin also took an arm cover and put it on. The moment the arm cover was put on, Sillin felt the arm cover fit well with his arm. Although it wasn't 100% fit, it was at least 80%. Using the weapons on the arm holster was as easy as moving a finger. Sillin gave it a try and looked at the weapons that were equipped on the arm holster. There were cold weapons, sharp knives that looked like wrist blades, ropes, extremely thin filaments that could hold a lot of weight, and there were also weapons that could fire. The arm cover itself was also an extremely high level of protection. Sillin brought over an armor-like thing and put it on Tang Qiuqiu. After all, Tang Qiuqiu's physical fitness was not as good as the others. This protective armor was very light and could move with the body's movements. Its defense was also very good, and it could better protect Tang Qiuqiu. Qifeng fiddled with the arm cover that was similar to the one Sillin had. He felt very uncomfortable wearing it, so he took it off and threw it aside, no longer paying attention to it. Sillin didn't force him. After all, Qifeng was indeed different from the others. Frunze also provided a batch of slightly more powerful firearms. Everyone chose them according to their preferences and needs. However, the aircraft that Frunze had selected was a mini-model. Schotten looked at it and discussed with Falvey. Each team would have one aircraft or armor vehicle, and they would move according to the team's needs and keep in touch. Sillin chose the aircraft, and he planned to start from the periphery. Once the teams were ready, they began to move. People like Udos, who were more inclined towards aircraft, chose to fly the aircraft directly. The aircraft was very small, and it could only accommodate one person. Also, it was not suitable for tall and strong people. Udos, on the other hand, was just right. After sitting in it, just looking at the control panel made Udo's blood boil, and he was eager to try it out. Udo's aircraft flew together with Sillin's aircraft, and he took care of some second-generation flying machines in the air. The second-generation machines were very agile, and they were very fast. If one was not careful, they could easily be shot down. However, as Udos gradually familiarized himself with the operation of the aircraft, he became more and more adept at it. He could even perform a few super maneuvers. Sillin and his team flew to the periphery from a high altitude. They didn't encounter many second-generation mechanical birds, and it didn't take long for them to arrive at their original destination. There were some fourth-generation and fifth-generation robots fighting with the third-generation robots there. The second-generation robots were mainly heading toward the city. Because there weren't many second-generation robots, they didn't see any first-generation ones either. The prey here is all ours. Carrie looked at the arm holster on his arm, playing with his gun, and said, "When we get there, everyone pay attention. Don't act alone, at least in groups of 2, so that you don't know when you're surrounded," Sillin emphasized. "Shuecho, you stay by Chocho's side and cover him. Chiefing, you follow me." Sillin pointed at Shuecho and Chiefing. As for the others, they had already made their own choices. After contacting Udos on the aircraft, Sillin waved his hand. "Begin." Because the first-generation robots had all left, the remaining villages were in ruins. Collapsed houses were everywhere, and bullet holes and tangent lines from laser weapons were everywhere. It could be seen that the planet was still in the process of being modified. Otherwise, the land would have been mechanized like the city. Tang Chocho stayed at sniping point and was in charge of sniping. Shuecho was around Tang Chocho, killing the robots that got close. Carrie, Beaver, and Yudi had already rushed up to kill. The three of them worked well together, and Tico and Lycrabe also worked well together. Udos in the air was getting more and more aggressive, challenging the robots' lock-on skills at every moment. Other than the two little fellows, Scarlet Wind and Tang Chocho, Sillin didn't have to worry about anyone else in the team. Bang! Sillin sent a second-gen robot flying with a single punch, but he only managed to leave a shallow dent on its body. Unlike the third-gen robot that was directly smashed into smithereens, the second-gen robot that was sent flying quickly climbed back to its feet and aimed its light tube at Sillin. Sillin dodged it, and just as the robot was about to fire at Sillin, Chiefing pounced on the robot from behind. When the robot turned its head, Chiefing's claws stabbed into the robot's eyes. After twisting a few times, the robot's movements became sluggish, as if there was a programming error. It was only after Sillin added another stab that the robot finally stopped. Dragging it to a hidden place, Sillin used the particle cutter to cut open the robot's head, revealing the thing inside. On the robot's head, there was a hard object the size of a peanut. This hard object had a lot of fibrous wires around it, which were equivalent to human nerves, but the wires of the robot were not as fragile as human nerves. Even if these wires were cut, the robot's movements wouldn't be affected too much. Just now, when Chiefing used his claws to stir, he cut more than half of the wires around the peanut-sized object, which slowed down the robot's reaction. These wires that were connected to that hard thing were nanowires and other microfibers, and that hard thing was the liquid core nuclear brain specially made by the Robert family. Since the peanut-sized object wasn't damaged, it proved that the liquid core nuclear brain inside was still intact. Sillin took out an alloy knife and cut it. This special alloy knife didn't cut the hard shell in one go, and it took several cuts before it made a small opening. Crack! The hard shell that was wrapped around the liquid core nuclear brain broke, and a liquid that looked like mercury flowed out. This was the real liquid core nuclear brain. Sillin looked at this liquid, and there was a moment of absent-mindedness. It was as if he had returned to the experiment platform and the tube of liquid that was injected. Wasn't it similar to this liquid core? Could it be that crazy Ho-Lei was a member of the Robert family? That couldn't be right. Later on, Sillin also looked up information about Ho-Lei, and the Robert family didn't have a person like Ho-Lei. After all, the Robert family didn't have a genotype as low as Ho-Lei's, and Sillin, who had come into contact with friends, knew that the two of them didn't have any similarities in their DNA and genetic information. The liquid core technology was invented by the Robert family hundreds of years ago, and there were no relevant reports in the League of Stars about people outside of the Robert family researching a new liquid core. What they researched was an outdated product that the Robert family had researched a long time ago. In that case, did Ho-Lei imitate the Robert family's liquid core technology to invent the improved liquid core? Huimao moved closer to the pool of liquid and sniffed it. He even licked it. It wasn't bad as food. After the novelty wore off, he didn't think much of it. Seeing that Sillin kept staring at the pool of liquid without saying anything, Huimao raised his paw and waved it in front of Sillin. "What's wrong?" Sillin shook his head. "Nothing." After a pause, he said, "If I can get a good brain core like this one." Sillin pointed at the peanut-sized object. "Get as many as you can. I have a use for them." Chiefing didn't have any objections to this. It was easy for him to get this. All he had to do was reach into the brains of those robots and stir it around. Chapter 189. Somewhere on the planet, on top of a mountain peak, a man was sitting and fiddling with an instrument in front of him. He looked very young, very ordinary, and completely transparent in a crowd of people. The image of the instrument showed the battle scenes of the main places on the planet, and the one with the most images was the town where Sillin and the others were at. A second-generation mechanical bird flew over, placed two liquid core brains the size of chicken eggs on its claw in front of the young man, and then flew away again. This second-generation mechanical bird had put down the liquid core brains of two first-generation machines, and they were perfectly intact. Of course, it wasn't that easy to destroy a first-generation liquid core brain. After all, the outer shell of a liquid core brain was one of the sturdiest parts of a machine. The young man moved his gaze away from the instrument and looked at the two liquid core brains on the ground. He picked them up and examined them carefully, and then put them into a small, specially prepared box. After fiddling with the instrument for a while, the young man closed the instrument and stretched his waist. "That's it. I'm leaving. Why didn't you infect the fourth and fifth generations and be done with it?" Someone sitting not far behind the young man asked. "There's no need for that. Just treat it as an act of leniency for this incident," the person who was packing up the instrument said in a compassionate tone. The person behind the young man curled his lips and interpreted the expression on his face as, "I'll be a fool if I believe you. Leniency my ass." After packing up the instrument, the duo boarded a space plane not far away from them and left. On the other side, the 3rd B Squadron and the 6th Division were assisting the first generation in fighting against the rebels. Small squads like Sillin's on the periphery were doing fine. Overall, with the high-level equipment provided by friends, no one died for the time being. As long as the injuries weren't too serious, they could stay on the battlefield and continue fighting. In reality, Huimao really wanted to transform, but he didn't want to be discovered by friends, so he temporarily suppressed his thoughts. That being said, this cat form was more than enough to fight against the 3rd-generation robots. He could easily tear through the outer shell with a single claw. The 2nd generation was slightly more troublesome, but not too much of a threat. Plus, there weren't many 2nd-generation robots here. Sillin was using both a sword and a gun at the same time. The light bullets formed by the energy gun looked like exploding fireworks due to Sillin's nearly seamless shooting. Moreover, Sillin didn't just stay in one spot. His figure weaved through the robots, and the light blade in his other hand made continuous hissing noises as it cut through the mechanical bodies. Not far from Sillin, of course, Chiefing used claw after claw to fish out the liquid core brains that Sillin destroyed. If there were robots that came, Chiefing would mercilessly eliminate them. He had the ability to deal with the third-generation robots, and Chiefing's usual method was to tear them apart. As they fought, Sillin found that the reaction of these robots was getting slower and slower. The person controlling the virus has left, and Friends has been taking action. He's slowly taking back control of these robots, Hui Mao said. This was all analyzed from the received signals. Hui Mao was more and more impressed with his ability to analyze things. He was really an irreplaceable and incomparable existence. Indeed, as Hui Mao said, it didn't take long for the third-generation robots to suddenly go from young to old. Everyone also realized that things had changed. Shotten's voice came from the communicator hanging on his ear, explaining the reason for this situation. It was similar to what Hui Mao said. When the third-generation and second-generation robots stopped moving, everyone followed Shotten's instructions and stopped what they were doing. However, I didn't let down their guard. 5 minutes later, all the robots were sorted and lined up. Friends officially announced that he had taken back control of these robots. Hui Mao, who was squatting on Sillin's shoulder, snorted. Those who don't know better would think that Friends did something big. If the other party didn't take the initiative to leave, with the ability of Friends and his people, how could they have taken back control so easily? Meow, I despise you. Sillin flicked Hui Mao's ear with his finger. Don't say this in front of Friends. We still need to get some benefits from him. Hearing that they wanted to get benefits, Hui Mao immediately shut his mouth, but his tail was full of energy and he was very proud. When Sillin and the others returned, Friends was already waiting in front of the castle. As for the castle from before, it had already changed its form into that of a robot. It stretched out its arms to encircle Friends and the others, separating them from the second and third generation robots that were lined up outside to prevent any accidents. Sillin walked into the circled area. Hui Mao didn't follow Sillin, and Sillin didn't force him. As for the reason for this incident, the two captains didn't ask too much. The mission had been completed, and it was time to fulfill Friends' promise. Friends was quite straightforward. He handed the things that he had prepared long ago to Falvey and Schotten. In fact, he also knew that the two teams had collected some liquid brain cores, but Friends didn't care. Some of this technology was only known to the Robert family, and he was confident that even if the people from Vanguard got their hands on the liquid brain cores, they wouldn't be able to get any results. At most, they would just copy a low-quality product, just like the other people who peeped at the Robert family's technology. Besides, although the Robert family's robots were expensive to sell, there were still a lot of them in various places in the League of Stars. Those people had taken out the liquid brain cores for research, but they still hadn't been able to get any results. Friends was now concerned about avoiding the invasion of similar viruses. After this incident, he would connect all the robots on this planet in the same way as the first generation's nuclear brain cores. He would also inform his family about this incident. He believed that after this incident, Friends' position in the family would rise to another level. If something similar happened on other planets, they would definitely be wiped out. Friends indeed had the right to be arrogant. However, when it came to arrogant people like Friends, Schotten, and Falvey didn't have the patience to keep chatting with them. If Friends looked down on them, they would look down on Friends too. After receiving the payment and counting, they decisively retreated. The starship outside the planet had been trying to contact the people on the planet, but after Azrael's people left, it was quickly connected. Now, an aircraft had been sent to the planet to take them back. Sillin noticed that there was something wrong with the cat when Hui Mao jumped on his shoulder. However, Sillin didn't ask. He just pretended not to know. After returning to the starship, the injured people were immediately treated. This showed the benefits of having Lycrabe and Tico on board. The improvement of the drug formula, as well as the surgery and treatment methods, were all carried out quite smoothly and efficiently. Regarding this incident, the third team and the sixth team were much more familiar with each other. After all, they had fought together on the battlefield. They had gone through thick and thin together, so they didn't have any objections to the distribution of the loot. They even got together for a drink. After the successful celebration of this incident, everyone returned to their respective teams to rest. Chiefing had been forced to drink a lot by Carrie and was now sleeping soundly. Sillin was also getting ready to sleep, but Huimao jumped onto the bed and paced back and forth on the edge of the bed. He curled his tail irritably, pulled his ears back, and scratched the bed with his claws from time to time. Silin turned sideways and looked at Huimao, who was about to raise his claws to slap him. "I say, Master Cat, are you feeling angry?" Huimao's whiskers trembled. He opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say. He raised his claws and pressed them on Silin's nose. "I'll press, and press again." Silin pushed away the cat's claws and lifted Huimao up. "I'll give you 2 minutes to prepare. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't hold it in for a few days and not be able to poop." Huimao flicked his ears. "I don't need to poop." Then there was silence. 1 minute, Silin reminded. Otherwise, this stupid cat would be in a daze until Chiefing woke up. TSK, it was so stupid. It didn't know how to lie and couldn't even hide its thoughts. How could there be such a stupid mechanical life form? Licking his nose, Huimao looked at Silin and spat out something the size of an egg. This was the liquid core nuclear brain in the head of the first-generation robot under Friends. Silin picked it up and looked at it. This nuclear brain was slightly bigger than the second-generation robot, and from the looks of it, its hardness was not something the second-generation robot's nuclear brain shell could compare to. Silin looked at Huimao. "When did you kill a first-generation robot?" When Huimao heard this, he immediately exploded. "I wasn't the one who beat it up like that." At that time, Huimao did not follow Silin into the circled area. Instead, he took a stroll outside. Later, he saw some big guys lying on the ground in a mess. Some were beaten beyond recognition, and some had their heads completely blown off. Thinking that Silin needed those nuclear brains, Huimao jumped over to look, but he found that the nuclear brains were all gone. At the same time, he saw a different type of small machine taking the liquid core nuclear brain out of a first-generation robot's smashed head and taking it away. They were heading in the direction of the ancient castle. It seemed that Friends also paid a lot of attention to these first-generation nuclear brains. This made Wheeze even more curious. After searching for a while, it finally found a first-generation robot whose head hadn't been smashed to smithereens, but whose upper body had been destroyed beyond recognition. Then, it dug out the liquid core inside the first-generation robot's brain and swallowed it whole. The liquid core nuclear brain was in Huimao's stomach. As long as Huimao was not willing to reveal any information, the scanners would not be able to find anything. Therefore, when looking for the 3 missing first-generation nuclear brains, Friends did not find anything in Team 3 and 6 team. He also did not find anything after searching the entire world. Friends attributed the disappearance of the 3 first-generation nuclear brains to Azrael's actions. This was because, in the memory area of a second-generation robot's liquid core nuclear brain, there was an image of the person who transported the first-generation nuclear brain to Azrael. Huimao originally wanted Silin to take the initiative to ask, because he felt that nothing could be hidden from Silin. However, the reality was that Silin always pretended not to know and did not ask, so he held back and did not say anything. It was really embarrassing for a rare cyborg life form in the universe to act like this. Huimao really could not hold it in anymore. Seeing that Silin was about to sleep, the string in his brain snapped, and he jumped over to give him a claw. In the end, he was stopped by Silin's eyes. After the gray cat spilled everything out like beans, Silin fell silent for a few seconds. Then, he stretched out his hand and rubbed the gray cat's head for a while. It was only when the gray cat's fur was about to explode that he stopped. He stored the first-generation liquid core brain into the leaf-pattern ring and patted the cat's head. "Go to sleep. We'll have an extra meal tomorrow." Huimao, who was about to ask something, immediately kicked the question he was about to ask out of his head. "I want to eat fish biscuits." "Okay, fish biscuits." Huimao huffed and moved next to Silin. He leaned against Silin's arm and curled his body into a circle, preparing to sleep. He finally said what he had been holding back in his heart. "But what did I want to ask just now?" "Forget it. Let's just think about fish biscuits." Silin looked at the dumb cat who was sleeping like a dumpling beside him and revealed a smile. This guy. In fact, at that time, Silin also had the idea of taking the first-generation robot's liquid core brain. However, at that time, Friends was watching the first generation closely, so it was not easy to make a move. The second was that the first generation was not easy to deal with. It was such a big guy, and it moved very fast. Its defense and attack power were both very strong. If he could not take it down in a short time, it would be hard to explain if he was discovered. After the battle ended, he did not have time to look for it. They were both liquid core brains. Other than the way the brain was connected, it should be similar to the second and third generation. With some second and third generation liquid core brains on hand, Sillin did not think about getting his hands on the first generation liquid core brain. He did not expect that Hui Mao would get his hands on one. However, he could not let others know about this core brain. If a big mouth were to leak it, then the Robert family and Vanguard would inevitably have a conflict. After waking up, Sillin placed a large bag of fish biscuits in Hui Mao's personal storage cabinet. This was a cabinet that Hui Mao had specially made for Sillin. Every day, Hui Mao would rub his own scent on the cabinet and a large area around it. If the Miantuan had any ideas about his cabinet, then Hui Mao would definitely slap that gluttonous chameleon away. The two captains, Far and Shotten, went to discuss their next plans. At this stage, they were still relatively idle. Many people were experimenting with the new weapons they had obtained. Although they had used them on the battlefield, they could not help but touch them when they were idle. Sillin did not do any of these things. He had other things to do. Ever since Enji passed away, the workshop was left to Sillin. Regardless of whether it was engineering or biochemical experiments, they could all be done in this workshop. Of course, if it was a large engineering experiment, then it would not be possible. After all, the conditions here were limited. Sillin analyzed the liquid core nuclear brains of the level 3 and level 2 robots he had collected. Other than the hardness of the outer shell, the liquid chips inside the nuclear brains were different as well. The complexity and encryption of the chips inside the liquid core brains of the level 2 robots were higher. The data contained and the ability to collect data was twice as high as the liquid core brains of the level 3 robots. However, that was all. Perhaps the superiority of the materials used to construct their bodies was also a factor. However, that was not what Sillin wanted to understand. Right now, Sillin wanted to understand how these liquid cores were different from the ones he had injected into his body. The composition and structure of the chips inside the level 2 and level 3 robots' brains were similar to the liquid cores inside Sillin's body. However, if one were to look deeper into it, there is still a huge difference between them. The liquid core chips in the liquid core brains of the level 2 and level 3 robots were mainly made up of some liquid metal or non-metal materials that contained a large amount of information and computing power. However, the liquid core chips inside Sillin's body were biological liquid chips. They were similar to the genes of the main body. They could be integrated into the main body's genetic material and be replicated together. Sillin looked at the data on the monitor and closed his eyes to think. After a while, he decided to do an experiment. He took the Robert families and other types of robots and pulled out the various component blueprints. As for the component blueprints of the Robert family's robots, Sillin had personally scanned them. After comparing them with other robots, Sillin made some changes to some parts and made some small model parts. With these small model parts in hand, Sillin started to assemble them. He moved his fingers. It had been a long time since he felt this way. It was as if he had returned to Mo Heng's workshop. It was as if he could see the senior academic ruffian with his legs crossed and a teacup in his hands as he assembled the robot. His 10 fingers moved quickly without any unnecessary movements. Every time he assembled the parts, the strength and angle were just right. One by one, the parts were thrown up, and when they fell, they were moved by a single finger. The next moment, they were firmly installed in the most suitable position. In the brain of this small robot, Sillin installed a simple chip that he had made at the last minute. It was not a liquid core brain, so the operation and computing power were much smaller. However, as the first experimental product, Sillin did not have high expectations for this. There were a lot of parts. After assembling them and confirming that there were no problems with the circuit, he turned on the power. There was no comprehensive precision tester, but Sillin believed that it would not be bad. A small 10-centimeter tall robot standing on the experiment bench immediately seemed to come to life. Cylin gave it a series of commands, and the small robot also performed a series of actions on the experiment bench. It was very smooth, but Cylin still felt that something was missing, and he was still not satisfied. But when the time came, it should be much better to replace it with a liquid core brain. After turning off the power, Cylin disassembled the assembled body. Through the disassembly of the assembly, he could find some problems. After the assembly and disassembly, Cylin changed a part of the design. According to his ideal state, he tried to make the robot more in line with his goals. Finally, the design was more or less changed. This aspect was more or less complete. What was missing now was a suitable metal or some non-metal. The external materials of the robot were also quite important. These materials could not be too active, nor could they be too inert. That way, they could be more integrated into the design. But what should he use? Just as Cylin was worrying about this, news came. The result of the discussion between the two captains, Farr and Schotten, was to look for rare mineral deposits. Looking for mineral deposits was good news for Cylin now. Chapter 190. In the League of Stars, it was common knowledge that Sector M was the mining area. Many large families and consortiums had set up mining companies in Sector M. However, after so many years, the production of rare metals and precious metals in Sector M had fallen sharply since a long time ago. Therefore, it was common to hear of adventurers and hunters selling the rare metals and precious metals they found after their missions at a high price. There was no need to worry about not being able to find a buyer for those things, and many buyers did not hesitate to fight for those metals. This also showed the importance of those metals. However, such things were not common. For example, the T-13 mine Falvey and the others had found by accident during a mission. Rare minerals like that could only be found by luck. Although there were a lot of minerals in Sector M, those common minerals were not Schotten and Falvey's target. Their target was Sector U of the 13 backward sectors. As a laggard sector among the 13 sectors, the main reason why Sector U could not compare to Cylin's hometown, Sector X, was because of the habitability of the planets in this sector. Unlike Sector Z, Sector U wasn't filled with danger, and electromagnetic storms wouldn't erupt without warning. However, among the many planets in Sector U, planets with a rank A habitability were as rare as a phoenix's feather, and rank B habitability were all heavily developed regions. In Sector U, planets with a rank C and D habitability occupied more than half of the planet population. This was why many commercial companies didn't invest in this place. Without a market, there was not even a lot of cheap labor. Who would pay attention to this place? If this region was not one of the League of Stars' territories, they probably would not even bother with the formality of stationing troops here. Since this was mainly a mineral exploration mission, their attention was completely focused on this area. They would not waste manpower and resources to pay attention to other areas. Both the 3rd team and the 6th team had a lot of metal detection machines, so they did not need to send people over personally. However, mineral exploration was a boring job. Back when they were searching for habitable planets in Sector Z, they had plenty to do because they had to be vigilant against high-speed moving objects and electromagnetic storms in space at all times. But now that they were in a relatively stable environment like Sector U, the rest of the 3rd team and the 6th team, other than the technical staff, were all entertaining themselves. Since there were a few new members in Cylin's squad, Carrie, Xiao Shang, and the others wouldn't be too bored. When they were looking for Udo, they would engage in virtual battles on the microcomputer and tell him jokes that were not suitable for children. The animals would often gather together to play chess as well. Due to Hui Mao's leadership, they all had their own storage cabinets, and Carrie's storage cabinets were no longer under threat. Whenever he had time, Cylin would study the liquid chips in the workshop, improve all the blueprints, and modify and upgrade the liquid core computer. Modifying the program of the liquid chip isn't an easy task. Because of its complexity, the Robert family usually requires a lot of manpower unless it's mass production. Although the people of the Robert family are very capable in the field of robot manufacturing, and their individual computing ability is also relatively high compared to others, but it still requires more than 3 people to produce a robot to edit the liquid chip. Right now, Sillin was doing the work of 3 people alone, and he was doing it with relative ease. His computing power was several times higher than the robber family members, and he was about the same as a computing machine. Yudi and Beaver were upgrading the defense system, Dias and Asha were in their honeymoon phase, and no one would disturb them, and Lycrabe and Tico were busy with their own research. All in all, it was not too boring. Beep, beep. The internal communication devices of the various teams were activated, and the detectors that were sent out finally made a welcome discovery after more than a month had passed. Shatan said on the other end of the communicator, based on the analysis of the detector and the data identification, there are at least 2 types of precious minerals on that D-class planet. Captain, can you send me a copy of the analysis? Sillin asked. Sure. After connecting to the control microcomputer in the workshop, Shatan sent a detailed analysis to Sillin. Opening the analysis, Sillin looked at the various data and pictures and the relevant ratio analysis. His heart skipped a beat. This kind of performance is very suitable. Sillin wanted to build a special robot, and the external materials could not be lower than the first generation of Frunze materials. For this reason, he had specially studied the different products of various robot manufacturers and studied the composition ratio and related properties of these materials. Based on the design theory, Sillin calculated an ideal mixture of materials. This ratio could change its own properties under certain conditions, adjust its own magnetic field to adapt to different magnetic fields and gravitational forces on some planets, be able to switch between insulation and non-insulation flexibly, have a sense of temperature and decompression, and have good recovery ability. Among the composite materials, there were a few minerals that were very difficult to find. If he were to buy them, it was estimated that even if Sillin took out all the money he had, he would not be able to buy the ideal amount. Sillin did not like substitutes, so he originally decided that if he could not find these ideal minerals, he would not be able to build this robot. Unexpectedly, luck was on his side, and there was progress so quickly. Looking at the data on the screen, Sillin did some calculations and was quite satisfied with the analysis of the mineral samples that Shatan had sent over. Because it was a D-grade planet, the dispatch team members had to wear protective suits. The good thing was that there were basically no signs of life on D-grade planets, and this planet was the same. After many probes, no signs of life were detected, and there would not be any unknown creatures attacking them. Although the size of the planet was relatively small, it was very rich in mineral resources. The more ordinary mineral resources were fine, and there was no need to waste effort to mine them. They only had to pay attention to the precious mineral resources. Shatan had already discussed with Falvey and set up a few spots with the richest mineral resources, and each team would go to different places. Sillin took a few people in the aircraft and landed at the original coordinates. Wearing protective suits was a little inconvenient, but there was no other way. For the sake of their lives, they had to be careful. Sending out the mineral detector, Sillin looked at the screen in his hand. The places with precious mineral resources in this area were all displayed. After transmitting the detection information to the microcomputers in the hands of each team member, he opened the toolbox and sent out the mining machinery to prepare for mining. Chiefing did not carry any tools. It was his first time wearing protective suits, and he was obviously not used to it. Coupled with the environment of this planet, Chiefing's movements were stiff. Therefore, Sillin tried to let him familiarize himself with the process, and he could just watch and learn from the side. Shuechiu was wearing a protective suit that was almost circular. Because he did not have any special protective suits, and because he did not want to be left on the starship, Sillin made a protective suit to cover himself. Now, this white fatty was rolling around, looking very fresh, and did not seem to be out of place at all. Huimao was the only one in this team who did not wear protective suits, but this guy was still jumping around in this area, making everyone jealous. Because Huimao was free, Sillin gave him some verification programs. If there were mineral resources that could match the verification program, he would collect some. Watching Huimao running away, Sillin waved his hand. Let's start. When the 2 kinds of precious minerals were mined, Sillin used his upgraded scanner to scan them. The metal contained in the mineral resources was what Scylla urgently needed to build robots, and Scylla was very happy about this. 2 of the mineral resources here were enough. According to the internal rules of the hunter group, the mined mineral resources could be sold or kept for themselves. The choice was up to them. Scylla would distribute the mined mineral resources to everyone, and they could decide for themselves. Part of his own would be used to make mixed materials. While Scylla and the others were busy mining, Huimao sent a message that they had found a mineral resource that matched Scylla's verification program, but it was not on the surface of the planet. In short, they had to dig deep. Scylla looked at the information sent by Huimao and the rock formation scan. These mining machines could not complete the mining at that depth, but other machines that specialized in mining deeper could not reach that depth either. This was because before reaching the mineral resource, they would have to pass through a magnetic mining area. According to the data provided by Huimao, the strength of the magnetic field would seriously affect the operation of the machines, and deep mining machines could not reach that depth. Most importantly, it seemed that only a small area had the mineral resources. It seems that there is a relatively simple way. And so, while no one was aware, Huimao transformed. This transformation did not happen on the surface of the planet. It should be known that everything that happened on the surface of the planet was displayed on the external satellite monitoring system of the 2 starships. Scylla had no intention of revealing Huimao's background to the 3rd B Squadron just yet. It was possible that Falvey already knew some things about Huimao, but there were some key things that he did not know. Huimao first burrowed into the ground in cat form, and then transformed inside. The monitoring system would not detect the exact changes. At most, it would detect that there was a life form moving under the surface of the planet. But right now, everyone was busy mining, and the technicians on the starships were busy analyzing the mineral resources. As long as it was not a foreign life form or some other threat, the monitoring and scanning system would not sound an alarm. It was true that Huimao did not discover a lot of mineral resources. After purification, it was probably only enough to build 1 robot, and the remaining materials were not enough to build the composite outer shell of the 2nd robot. Huimao had also released some crystals when he was mining the mineral resources. After the scanning system confirmed that Huimao had never seen this kind of crystal before, and when he was on the surface, he did not detect any signal or reaction related to this crystal. At first, Huimao thought that this crystal was a little strange, so he took a look at it out of curiosity and was about to leave. Before he left, he habitually used Scylla's verification program to test this crystal, but who would have thought that a super compatibility would actually pop up? Huimao was dumbfounded. The metal mineral deep inside the planet was only at excellent grade out of 100%, but this crystal actually had a super compatibility. He hurriedly told this news to Scylla. Scylla was still a little stunned when he found out. The concept of super was just an upper limit that Scylla set for insurance. According to Scylla's theory, excellent should actually be the upper limit. After all, there was a gap between reality and theory, but he did not expect that there would really be something that could reach the theoretical upper limit. Huimao found that the thing was not easy to mine. It was a sphere with a diameter of 3 meters. Because of this crystal, Scylla directly handed the mining over to Dias and went to where Huimao was. He used machinery to expand the hole that Huimao had drilled. However, the surface was relatively narrow, and Huimao had drilled the hole in a different form, so there was no need for machinery to expand it. Following the hole, Scylla arrived at the place that Huimao had mentioned. Opening the protective cover, Scylla took off the protective suit and reached out to touch the sphere. The moment he touched it, a large amount of data was cleared. It really was the theoretical value. Because the theoretical value of this design was originally on the high side, some researchers even thought it was impossible to achieve. Scylla did not expect to actually encounter something that could reach the theoretical value. This crystal was spherical, but it was not a solid sphere. It had a core, and then countless branches extended from this core. Each branch was a strange and complicated thin crystal column. These thin crystal columns seemed to be covering the core with a thick layer of fluff. With a wave of his hand, Silin kept the crystal ball into the leaf pattern ring. At the same time, he kept some of the minerals that Hui Mao had already excavated and held the remaining minerals in his hand. It should be noted that most people's subspace containers could not be used on a D-class habitable planet. Therefore, even when Silin and Hui Mao walked out like this, no one suspected that Silin was hiding anything. After dealing with the matters here, Silin returned to the surface and headed to the mining area of the small team. Meanwhile, Hui Mao continued its journey underground. It found that searching for minerals underground was quite interesting. At least it was better than the boring mining outside with the others. However, to Hui Mao's disappointment, other than the spherical crystal, there were no other materials that had reached this super compatibility. There was not even any that had reached the excellent grade. There is only one other mineral that was of the same grade as the one they were mining. Even so, it was enough to make Shotten and Falvey happy. 3 types of precious minerals were enough for them to make a fortune. Yes, they could sell a portion and hand over the rest of the main team. This would greatly increase the influence of the 2 teams in the Vanguard Hunter group. After each team had finished mining, they returned to the starship. As for how these minerals should be handled, Silin had long since decided. After taking away his portion, Silin went back to the workshop and got busy. The others all chose to sell it. They all chose to sell it together with the rest of the team, and then split the money. Silin was assembling in the workshop. Now that some of the other parts have been taken care of, the main thing was to choose the main material for the robot. The spherical crystal that Hui Mao had found contained an unknown element. However, under certain conditions, it could be temporarily converted to a known non-metallic element or another known metallic element. After a detailed analysis of its properties, Silin was ecstatic. This was the perfect material for his theoretical design. Not only could it withstand pressure and restore memories, it was also the triple defense material that Silin had been looking for. It could resist high-energy radiation, strong acids and alkalis, and electromagnetic interference. Luck was a thing that was impossible to fathom. It was true that their luck this time was too good. Many people might not be able to find such a material, even after searching for a lifetime or several generations. The Robert family, for example, had never found such a material. Hui Mao was the absolute hero. The team continued their search in Sector U. Since they had found 3 types of precious minerals, the psychological pressure on the 2 captains had lessened a lot. It didn't matter even if they found nothing else in the remaining time. 10 days had passed since Silin went back to the workshop. During these 10 days, Hui Mao stayed in the workshop and watched Silin build the robot. He even dragged his own storage cabinet over, slept when he was tired, ate when he woke up, and continued watching after eating. Hui Mao could rest, but Silin couldn't even sleep for a moment during these 10 days. An enormous amount of calculations, an enormous amount of work, and an assembly that could not be stopped once it started. Although they relied on some synthesizing instruments most of the time, the key parts were all led by Silin. There was no room for sloppiness. 10 days later, Silin went out to replenish his energy before going back to the workshop and continuing the rest of the perfecting work. What on earth is Lieutenant Silin doing right now? Yudos asked while lying on a chair after exiting the virtual combat. Who knows? But this lieutenant has never disappointed anyone. Let me tell you a secret, Yudos. Carrie moved closer and said mysteriously, the last time this lieutenant stayed in the workshop for a few days, he went to destroy a planet the moment he came out. Seeing Yudo's mouth open into a big O shape, Xiao Shang curled his lips. It's a pity that we weren't there when they went to destroy Poison Fong. We couldn't see the scene. Ba Dao also echoed from the side. The incident with Poison Fong had left a pretty deep impression on them. It was also that incident that caused everyone to feel a sense of reverence towards Silin. I wonder what will happen when Lieutenant Silin comes out this time. Yudo's eyes were filled with anticipation. Xiao Shang, Carrie, and the others thought of something at the same time and wore odd expressions on their faces. Right now, they were thinking, it can't be another parasite, can it? They only had a rough understanding of the incident with Poison Fong, but they had seen the emblem on Poison Fong's members and the last skeleton of Skeleton King with their own eyes. Even without the parasites, they still felt chills run down their spines. Rubbing his stomach, Carrie stood up and stretched his arms. I'm going to get some food. Do you want to bring it? Of course. Do you even need to ask? Xiao Shang listed a few types of portable food in one go. Carrie returned a disdainful gesture, opened the door, and walked out. Because of the food Ba Dao listed, Carrie turned around and cursed a bit at them. He didn't want to bump into someone and even step on the person's foot when he backed out with his back facing the door. Oh, I'm sorry. Carrie was about to turn around and apologize when he suddenly realized that he didn't know this person. Why would a stranger appear in this squad when no other members had been notified? Carrie's body immediately tensed up, and he entered a high alert state. Why does this person not have any signs of life?